then come back doesn't matter. The order is unimportant. What is important, though, is that we break all of these down and really basically touch on some serious strategy outside of just tiers as well. How are you drafting tight ends? How serious are the tiers when it breaks from Kelsey to Waller to Kittle, so on and so forth, into the later rounds of the draft, whether it's standard league, just redraft, PPR, super flex, whatever it is, and more importantly, best ball. So, Matt, a lot to dive into today. It's not a position that everyone gets super excited about, but it's a super important position when it comes to how you attack it.
Yeah, it's probably the most nuanced position we have. If you just look at your standard 12-team leagues, your team with Travis Kelce has a significant advantage over that number 12 team who's maybe streaming week to week and getting 5 or 6 points. So where you draft some of the more valuable tight ends is crucial to these overall fantasy drafts.
No doubt. And I think it's important to point out as well that, people look at tight ends and they say, I don't like drafting early tight ends. They're just not as good. But you have to consider a couple of things here. Travis Kelce was the 7th best PPR producer in the league last year. And I'm talking running back, wide receiver, and tight end, not just pass catchers. Darren Waller PPR formats was 10th. So both of these guys were top 10 in scoring, not at their positions, of course, not even as pass catchers, but among all skill players. So I think, Matt, it's important to consider not just that these guys are legitimate elite wide receivers playing a tight end position, but also how scarce the position is at tight end compared to other spots. Whereas if you're landing one of the 2, maybe 3 elite tight ends in this league, you're, as you kind of put it right there, you're head and shoulders ahead of everybody else as long as the rest of your draft looks solid.
For sure. You basically have a wide receiver 1 in your tight end position. And we know from experience, it's much easier to fill the wide receiver slots than it is the tight end slot. So there is a lot of merit to drafting them early.
Yeah, and I think you could also make an argument. I don't have any, quantifiable data on this, but it just kind of makes sense given how one position just doesn't produce as well on the whole, and it's also there's less of them. But it's got to be much easier to hit on late round wide receivers that end up, making starts for you than it would be to hit on late round tight ends.
For sure. Let's even just look back to last year, some of the popular late round tight ends. Adam Troutman, Chris Herndon's been a popular late round tight end.
Cole Kmet last year with 2.
Cole Kmet. I mean, we're talking my Chicago Bears and my Notre Dame Fighting Irish in that one. That one really hurt. But yeah, like you said, a lot of these late round tight ends aren't panning out, whereas the late round wide receivers, there's more of them on the field. It's a little easier for a late round wide receiver to produce.
All right. Well, now that we have that in mind, one more question, then we jump into our tiers. Yesterday I did an underdog draft. By the way, follow Matt and myself. Follow Matt at _Gajeski on Twitter, myself at Laffy_D. Throw them up there if they're not there already. I'm going to be tweeting out draft links, private draft links to jump into. First come, first serve. But yesterday was a lot of fun. We filled up real quick. It's only a $5 one, but we're going to do a $50 one. Matt and I are going to jump in one of those pretty soon, 25, 10. We'll go up and down no matter what it is, whatever your stakes are. But if you haven't signed up yet, go to underdog.fantasy.com. Use the promo code Awesemo, AWESEMO, and get $25 upon signing up. So you're ready for when we do these drafts if you want to join us. Again, at Laffy_D, at Matt_Gajeski. We'll be throwing links out, doing some drafts leading up to the season. Underdog Fantasy is awesome. You'll love it. And outside of those huge tournaments, the $1 million and one, the first, the puppy 3, and then the other high stakes one, they got some cool private leagues that we'll be getting in on as well. But Matt, yesterday I was doing an underdog draft and Kelsey fell to 9 to me. And to me, it was just an incredibly easy decision, but people continue to draft, Aaron Jones ahead of him and a number of other players, which many of them, I think you can make an argument for. Where do you have Kelsey ranked?
Yeah. So I have Kelsey ranked right at number 7 right now. So he's right in the same tier that has Devontae Adams, Stephon Diggs, and his teammate Tyreek Hill. If you're just looking across positions, within the tight end position, I do have him on an island by himself. He is the only surefire first-round tight end. He has everything you want: elite offense, elite target share. He has already posted elite production. I mean, you go back through this guy's career, he's never had less than 850 receiving yards in a season where he played a majority.
Sounds good. And we are live. Welcome to the MLB Deeper Dive. It is Friday, August 20th. I am Josh Engleman. I am joined by Adam Scherer, and we are back once again to break down all 14 games on today's main slate. Before we get started doing anything, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, hit that notification bell so you know when everything goes live, and shout out to the presenting sponsor of this show. That would be OddsShopper. We will touch on OddsShopper in a little bit, but first, Adam, how different has your day been since we talked 4 hours ago?
Been about the same. Wrote the deep dive, got that out about an hour or so ago, and then ready to talk about the slate again, but with some more information, updated tools on the site, updated ownership, bunch of lineups. So it should be a good show.
We got a lot of good stuff to dive into. I'm excited for it. It's a pretty good slate. I have not double checked any weather concerns, but we had none earlier today. I'm going to hope that that's still the case. Yeah, it appears that it is. So we could just rip through 14 games and enjoy ourselves. You ready?
Yep.
Starting it off, once again, your Orioles, my Braves, 4.1 run implied total on the Orioles, 6 runs for the Braves. Keegan Aiken, Max Fried at 9% ownership currently. Keegan Aiken should be in the negatives, but is that what amounts to 0? Talk to me a little bit about Max Fried in this spot.
This is a convenient spot for you to decide that they're your Braves again. But anyway, I think it's an okay spot for Fried here. He's not pulling a whole lot of ownership on DraftKings, 8,600, only about 8 to 9% ownership. I think that's a reasonable range for him. He is a good pitcher, has about a 24.5% strikeout percentage this season. It's about 23.5% against right-handed hitters specifically, and he'll be facing 8 of them here. Not an easy park to pitch in Camden Yards, but Fried does typically do a good job of limiting damage against him. He doesn't allow a ton of hard contact for the season, right? He's only have a 138 expected ISO. The Orioles lineup is certainly capable of doing some damage, like 1 through 6, really. Mullins is really good. Mountcastle, Mancini, Hayes, Severino all have considerable power. Ramon Urias projects as an average major league hitter. So it's not like it's a lineup that you expect Fried to really just carve through, but it's also not a scary enough lineup where I'm shying away from Fried. There's a lot of really good pitching on this slate, though. So I kind of just think that Fried is being owned about where he should be. I think he's a good option in tournaments. He's certainly someone where if you have some more popular hitters, you can take the ownership discount and you're still getting a good pitcher in Fried. He's likely to have a good game, but he's not someone I'm prioritizing just across all of my lineups, given the alternatives at pitcher.
I agree with you completely. This Orioles lineup isn't as bad as it seems. You would think that it would be, but I have it dead neutral. From Steamer's weighted runs created plus. I got it at 100. So it's not the dumpster fire that you expect. That would be Keegan Aiken. So we won't even talk about him. We do, however, need to talk about the Atlanta Braves, who have maintained the ownership that I was hoping they would, which means they are 3rd overall for me, 1st in leverage. This right here is unquestionably my number 1 team for today. This is my top stack.
Yeah, right there with you. And the way things look right now, I think I probably get a pretty insane amount of them, considering that we actually have them with the highest top stack percentage. They're not getting much ownership at all. A lot of ownership going to teams like Colorado, New York. Now we have a lot going to Toronto that we didn't have this morning. But I think because of how expensive the Braves are, it's just still going to keep that ownership in check. When you have 4 of the top 5 hitters, at least $5,500 on DraftKings, Jorge Soler, the one in there that's only $4,600. But there's still ways you can stack this team. For one, there's power, in the 6th spot with Travis d'Arnaud. There's power with Adam Duvall hitting 7. There is a cheap bat hitting 8th and Guillermo Heredia, even though he's nowhere near as appealing as those other guys. But then there is also at least a couple of cheap pitchers I think are kind of interesting today. There's plenty of cheap one-offs that you can use with Atlanta because it's a 14-game slate and there's always going to be some cheap hitting. So I still think you can get there. It's just that it's going to be difficult for people who are just using optimizers and not doing anything else. They're not going to prioritize Atlanta just because teams like the Yankees are going to be easier to get to. Atlanta, though, I still don't think it's going to be that difficult. And I think it's a really, really good spot against a pitcher in Aiken who has allowed about a 200 expected ISO to righties this year, a Baltimore bullpen behind him that's not very good. To me, there's no reason not to like the Braves here.
The only concern that I have, and it would change nothing for me, this is unquestionably my top team. I only project the Braves for 5.2 runs, and the implied total is a bit higher than that. So
by like a full run.
Yeah, by like a full run. So that is the only thing that's giving me some pause right now. I think that the scoring environment should be a little bit lower. We'll see where that shakes out. Even if I drop that down a bit, we're talking about a team that would be still a high leverage option. Maybe they're not my first overall, but they could just as easily be second. So it's not enough that like it makes me want to freak out and change anything. They're just not pulling enough ownership. Only Jorge Soler is north. Oh, Jorge Soler is at 7.8. Ozzy Albies at 5.8. Everybody else below 5. Yeah. This is the spot. Just get it.
Like, so I think what you're saying for anybody looking at the top stacks tool on the site, like we have Atlanta number 1 at 11.5%. Let's say you make them 7% like Toronto is, and then you kind of bump up Colorado, New York, and Toronto. You're still getting Atlanta being drastically underowned.
Yep, 100%, exactly. And it's the same situation for FanDuel. I have them second overall. They are the number 1 leverage stack. Soler is getting a lot of ownership there. He's only 3,300, getting 18%. Austin Riley at that point is also pulling 11%. They're still the most under-owned team for me. Let me double check it on the top stacks tool just to see if it's the same situation, but I assume that it is. They are second in top stack on FanDuel, but still a pretty good leverage stack. It's bigger on DraftKings, but either way, you got to play the Braves. Do you have to play the Orioles?
No, I don't think you have to play the Orioles.
Okay.
I mean, I think you can look, if you're looking for relatively low owned one-offs that have some power, guys like Ryan Mountcastle hitting second at 3,400, Austin Hayes batting cleanup at 2,800, Pedro Severino has power as a $3,300 catcher. Those are guys in these large field tournaments you can certainly mix in, because I think that in a lot of lineups, you're going to have pretty popular pitching tonight because there's just some very clear-cut plays. There are a lot of good bats that are going to get some ownership. You can certainly mix these guys in as low-owned one-offs or two-mans or whatever that have some power. But in terms of, do I expect to be prioritizing the Orioles against Fried above a lot of other spots on the slate? The answer is no.
We're on the same page. I have them 18th overall, middle of the pack for leverage. So I don't have much else to add. Anything else you want to touch on, Orioles or Braves?
No.
We continue on to sort of a similar situation, but dramatically different from an ownership perspective. Yankees and Twins. 6-run implied total for the Yanks, 4.1 for the Twins. Nestor Cortez and Charlie Barnes. I'm not going to Charlie Barnes for sure. I think that you can get to, 5% or so if you're a 150 maxer on Cortez, but he's not a priority and he's not pulling any ownership. Has anything changed for you? Do you have any interest in Cortez?
No, not on this particular slate. Talked a bit this morning about how his numbers as a starter have gone down as you would expect. He's made 6 starts this season, has a 20.8% strikeout percentage. For the season overall, he's at 26%. So you have seen the strikeout numbers come down a bit. That's not unusual. The Twins lineup is a bit weaker than usual. No Miguel Sano makes it a little bit less scary, but they do have Willians Astudillo in the lineup. So that's another guy in addition to Luis Arias that just does not strike out. Mitch Garver, Donaldson, Polanco, these are all dangerous bats. It's just still not a spot that I think I'm going to get to on this particular slate because there are so many pitchers I really, really like.
Well, then we do need to talk a little bit about the Yankees. They are my number 2 overall stack. However, they are dead last for leverage. Every single Yankee outside of Brett Gardner is pulling pretty aggressive ownership for their spot. I do not like that. I do not agree with it. They look like great plays, but I don't want to be stacking these guys up all that frequently in large field contests. What do you want to do with the Yanks?
Yeah, same boat for me right now. Just they're pulling the most aggregate ownership on the slate. And it's one of those where it's just like, yeah, they should be in terms of if they weren't, I would love the Yankees, but they are. And that's not surprising given how inexpensive they are. Luke Voit at 3,400 is just a misprice. LeMahieu hasn't been good this year, but still leading off at 4,200. Pretty weak second base position on a team with a 6+ implied run total. He's going to get a lot of ownership. Joey Gallo should really never be 4,400 outside of maybe like the worst matchups, which this isn't. There's just a lot of cheap guys in this lineup. And then also you don't have Anthony Rizzo, which in a lot of cases, it would be like, okay, well, that makes the lineup a little bit weaker. And I mean, it does, but what it also does is it's just going to push even more ownership to Luke Voit. Whereas, yesterday you kind of had it split between those two and it made it so you could stack the Yankees at a little bit less combined ownership. Now it's just going to be like everybody plays Luke Voit. So, obviously mix these guys in where you can. If you have, like, let's say, for example, you stack Baltimore for whatever reason, that's a spot where you can certainly just mix the Yankees bats in and you'll be fine. But as far as, putting 5 of these guys together in larger field tournaments, I don't anticipate that I do it all that often.
Just as a quick reminder, Gretzky Q in 2 minutes in case you're not in it yet.
Thank you.
You're welcome. We can then take a look at the Minnesota Twins. I have the Twins 13th overall, 23rd in leverage. Doesn't seem like a spot where I'm trying to get there all that frequently. I do think they're underrepresented a little bit in the market. I think their run total should be a little bit higher. There's certainly power potential here. Kepler, Rooker, Donaldson, Garver, but right now they're just sort of a middle of the pack team.
Yeah, I think there's power potential, but I think it's more so as kind of like Baltimore to me, like mini stacks, one-offs, they're fine. Josh Donaldson's cheap. He's got a 216 ISO, 234 expected ISO against left-handed pitching this season. Mitch Garver's fairly priced. He's got power as a catcher. Polanco's got some power for a second baseman. Like I said, not the deepest position there. So I think those guys are fine, but it's going to be really hard for me to get a lot of 5-man Minnesota stacks. I think it's going to be more so just mixing in those guys for value at a little bit less ownership than some other power hitters in that price range.
Anything else in this game?
No.
All righty. Apparently we got 3 lineups in the last couple minutes that I've looked, so I'm going to do a little bit of refreshing after I kick this one over to you. Blue Jays and Tigers. 5.9 run implied total for the Jays, 3.6 for the Tigers. Robbie Ray, Tyler Alexander. No one's rostering Tyler Alexander, but Robbie Ray, a little bit different of a story. 33% projected ownership. I got him at 32, so I think it's spot on. He looks like one of the best options today. I have him in the same sort of bucket as Chris Sale, as Sonny Gray. I just like Robbie Ray today.
Yeah, I'm there with you. I think I'm a little concerned about the matchup in that the Tigers actually are running a pretty solid lineup out there against him. If you look at the top 6 in the Tigers lineup, since the start of the 2019 season, all 6 of those guys have a WRC plus of at least 108 against right-handed pitching. Castro's at 108, Grossman's at 109, Candelario's at 115, Cabrera's at 148, Scopes at 150, Nunez is at 109. So it is some right-handed bats that can do damage if Ray's not on top of his game. But Ray is still a really good pitcher. He's cut down on his walks this year, which was something that's plagued him a lot in the past. His home run numbers are elevated, but he's gotten a bit unlucky there, in part because he pitched so many of his home games in either Dunedin or Buffalo, which were extremely hitter-friendly. Rogers Center still favors bats, but not to that extreme. 180 expected ISO versus a 200 actual ISO to righties this year. He's a good pitcher. He's got about a 30% strikeout percentage to both sides of the plate. It's a good spot for Ray. I expect to roster him a lot. I think the field's got it right. I do just think it's a little bit scarier of a spot against Detroit than maybe it seems if you just glance really quickly at the lineup.
I get it. I do think it changed a little bit. I think the Tigers are a little underrepresented in the market. Blue Jays, though, seem to be spot on. Let's talk a little bit about the Jays. Tons of power potential in this lineup. We've got Toronto 4th in the top stack tool, but showing up a little bit overowned. How are you handling Toronto against Tyler Alexander?
Yeah, I think this is one of the big changes since this morning is that their aggregate ownership came up. But I think also when you look individually at where the ownership's going, it's that you're getting about 15% on DraftKings going to Alejandro Kirk. You're getting about 12% going to Kevin Smith. I think that Kirk should get a lot of ownership at catcher. I think he's one of the top catching options. He projects to be a good major league hitter, and he's only 3,100. Kevin Smith projects, he's only played 1 game in the major leagues, 19 home runs at AAA this year, 146 WRC plus. Steamer projects him for a 97 WRC plus in the major leagues, but he's 2K flat on a team with about a 6 implied run total, hitting 8th. Those guys are both getting some ownership just because they're cheap. When you look at the rest of the team, Marcus Semien pulling about 16%, Gurriel, who's inexpensive, is pulling about 12. But you look down to like Randall Grichuk at 6%, Guerrero at 7, Bichette at 10. Those are a little bit more realistic. And, it is a really, really good spot against Alexander. So the point here is that while I do think in the aggregate, Toronto is going a little bit overowned, if you run a stack that pays up a little bit more and maybe skips over Kirk or skips over Smith or skips over both, you're not getting them unowned, but you are saving a bit of ownership while still getting really the best bats in the lineup.
1,400 on the Gretzky. So close, but no cigar.
1,400. You missed by like 1,350.
Yeah, I know, but that's a lot better than the 10,000.
Yeah, I was like 10,500.
Right. Look, it's not close, but it's like closer. I wish that we would have had the bet. You weren't in for the last one when
I saw Ben's confusion.
Yeah, well, it was my confusion, I guess. Ben was right. I was wrong, but I happened to be also correct in winning, so I didn't care that I was wrong. Worked out really well for me. They should have just lied and made me pay. So kudos to them guys for being nice about it. What do we do about Tiger's bats on the opposite side of Robbie Ray? Is there value there given the fact that he's 33% owned?
I think a little bit. Not that I want, it's a 14-game slate, so I don't care quite as much about the leverage you're getting against Ray. But I do think when, right now we have Jonathan Scope projected for about 1% ownership, Jeimer Candelario, Nunez, all these guys are just getting no ownership. And like I said, they do have power. So Ray does give up home runs. He, along with his strikeouts, it wouldn't be unheard of for him to give up a couple of shots and still have a pretty decent start tonight. But with how deep the pitching slate is, if Robbie Ray goes 6 innings and gives up 3 runs, strikes out, let's say 6, that's going to be a pretty good start in terms of fantasy points, but it's also pretty unlikely to be the slate winning start compared to all of the other really good pitching options on the slate. So even just going to like 1 or 2 of these guys, whether it's Scope or Candelario, whoever fits into your lineup the best, I do think that makes sense in tournaments. Scope, if I'm only picking one, would be the guy I like the most.
Okay. I don't have much to add to it. They didn't pop up all that frequently. You give them a slight bump for Robbie Ray, but I still think they're going to be a little bit too far down the list for me. Anything else for Jays and Tigers?
Nope.
Red Sox and Rangers. Man, these first 4 games that we're going over are 4 pretty significant favorites. 5.7. Go ahead.
I was going to say, if I don't have a lot of runs in my lineup by the time like the 8:00 games start, I'm in trouble.
Yeah. 5.7 run implied total for the Red Sox, 3.3 for the Rangers. Chris Sale, Dane Dunning. Probably not going to Dunning given this Red Sox lineup, but we will be going to Chris Sale, 9,700 on DraftKings, 38% owned, 10,700 on FanDuel, just 11% there. Talk to me a little bit about Chris Sale today.
So he threw 89 pitches against the Orioles in his first start back from the injured list. He only went 5 innings, but I think the pitch count is more important to me than the innings. Like, I don't think if he had been at 75 pitches after 5, they would have pulled him. I assume the Red Sox are smart enough that they realize innings don't actually matter. It's how many pitches you're throwing. So I'm guessing that you're getting 90 to 100 pitches from Sale today. I'm assuming he gives you something like 6 innings. I said before, I think my biggest concern in terms of workload isn't so much that he's on any sort of like really significant restriction. I think it's more so if he were to run into trouble in like the 5th inning or in the 6th inning, they might be less willing to say like, okay, get yourself out of it than they would if he'd been pitching all season long. Maybe they just say like, okay, you're at 86 pitches, you have 2 guys on and 1 out. Let's just get to the bullpen. So that's my only concern, but that's not really actionable. It's more so just like, that's something that wouldn't really surprise me. By
the way, I'm on the same page with you. I don't get the sense that they would just leave him out there at that point in time.
Right. Like if he'd been pitching all season long, they're just going to say like, yeah, okay, Chris Sale's better than whoever we're going to bring in. But other than that, I don't really have any concerns here. Great matchup against Texas. Their strikeout percentage isn't crazy high for the season, but they also have the 2nd lowest WRC plus against left-handed pitching, only been better than the Pirates, which is not saying much. Sales velocity in his last game was in line with what he did in the 2019 season, which was a couple miles an hour lower than previous seasons. But still in 2019, he had a sub-3 xFIP. He struck out like 36% of hitters. If that's going to be the Chris Sale we get going forward, he's still going to be a really, really good pitcher. And this is a phenomenal spot against Texas. I prefer him slightly to Robbie Ray. I think it's a spot where reasonable minds can differ. I think some projection systems like him more, some like Ray more. I personally like Sale slightly more, but both guys I expect to be 2 of my highest owned pitchers in tournaments.
The more important question to me is, what do we do with the Boston Red Sox? Because I see them as pretty significantly under-owned in a great spot. Now, Dane Dunning is good, or at least slightly above average, if you want to go that direction. And the Red Sox are pulling no ownership, nothing to Kike. Devers at 2, Bogarts at 2, Schwarber at 5, and he's the only guy north of 5. How do you feel about Boston?
I like them as long as their ownership stays low, which it is right now, because in terms of pitchers that you really want to pick on, I don't think Dane Dunning is at the top of the list. I think he's just a pretty good pitcher. He's struck out about 23% of lefties and righties alike, 125 expected ISO to righties, 149 to lefties, just nothing that stands out that you're going to target. But this is still a really good Red Sox team in Fenway Park. And it's also a pitcher in Dunning that typically doesn't go that deep in the game. So between the combination of the Red Sox could just go off against Texas's bullpen and the fact that Dunning is certainly not infallible, they can still get to Dunning. Like, he's not a great pitcher. He's just pretty good. the fact they're getting no ownership looks really, really good here. Alex Verdugo is hitting sixth. He was hitting second in the projected lineup. So not quite as good a value option as I thought he was earlier in the day, but still a good option in tournaments at 3,300. He's got almost a 200 expected ISO against right-handed pitching this year, and he's really cheap. The rest of the team's relatively expensive, particularly Devers, Bogarts, and Martinez. Kyle Schwarber gets a nice lineup bump up to fourth. He's only 4,300. So I think he actually stands out as the top Red Sox option for me. But overall, this team's just not getting any ownership right now. Schwarber leading the way at only 5%.
I have Devers at the top of the heap, but Schwarber isn't really far behind. And obviously Devers at 5,800, you're paying the full freight. Either way, I'm happy to go to the Red Sox. I think, I don't want to say that they pair well with the Braves, but I see them in sort of a similar light, just not as awesome. Dane Dunning probably causing that a little bit. If Keegan Aiken were pitching for the Rangers today, it might look a little bit different.
Yeah, just a little bit. It's kind of from like an overarching standpoint, it's just that's what happens on 14 game slates. Like you can only get so much ownership to so many teams. And that's kind of why, when people talk about MLB DFS tournaments, it's kind of like that the general strategy is just to not play the top one or two teams, at least all that often. And like, it sounds dumb, but it's reasons like this where the Yankees are going to get a lot of ownership, but they're not really different than the Braves or the Blue Jays or the Red Sox. In terms of their chances of just being able to go score 10 plus runs and win you a tournament.
Right. And the Yankees are pulling nearly 20% of all ownership on the slate, whereas Boston's pulling 2.5%. Those ratios just don't add up in terms of the likelihood of really breaking free from the pack today. So that's the kind of stuff that we're always trying to look at. Anything else here, Red Sox or Rangers? I can't imagine you're going to the Rangers.
I'm not going to the Rangers.
Yeah, as expected. 26th for me. By the way, Red Sox, I have 13th overall, but still third in the leverage metric. So they will get pulled up quite a bit. Time to talk a little bit about the rest of the schedule for today, because we are not done. At the end of the deeper dive, 6 p.m. Eastern time, MLB Live Before Lock with Greg and Terry. They are going to take you all the way up until 7 o'clock before they give way to NFL Live Before Lock for the preseason. Eric and Matt Gajewski, they're going to have some fun going for that show, plus free content. We talk about it a lot. The ownership is very important, and it is free today for MLB. So whether Nightbot drops that link into chat or you just head to awesemo.com, browse directly to the MLB main slate ownership, you will be able to get it for free today. To the Reds we go. 5-run implied total for the Reds, 3.7 for the Marlins. Sonny Gray, Alicia Hernandez. No ownership going to Hernandez. Solid pitcher. Some ownership going to Sonny Gray, probably because he gets to face the Marlins and he's 8,400. 35% owned on DraftKings, 25% owned on FanDuel. I think that it should be 31 on DK. So basically, I've got him properly owned. He looks like an amazing option. I
think salary included, Sonny Gray is the best pitching option on the slate on both DraftKings and FanDuel. Especially FanDuel, where the pitchers, the top tier guys like Sale and Ray are even more expensive than they are on DraftKings. I have no idea why Gray is 8,400 on DraftKings and I think 8,300 on FanDuel. He's tied with Blake Snell for the fourth highest strikeout percentage on the slate. Third highest strikeout percentage on the slate this season. And that's including Chris Sale, who has only made one start, but I assume is going to have a higher strikeout percentage going forward. 28.5% strikeout percentage for Gray. He has the best xFIP on the slate, slightly edging out Robbie Ray. He's just been a really good pitcher. He's facing Miami, which is one of the best matchups you can get. 84 WRC plus for the Marlins against right-handed pitching this year. They strike out at about a 24.5% clip. Gray does a good job keeping the ball on the ground when it is put in play. So the only thing that can make this better is if, it were a better park to pitch in if this game were in Miami. But still, Gray is just really, really good. He's got a good matchup against Miami. Gets to face the pitcher spot, which is another thing that Chris Sale doesn't get, that Robbie Ray doesn't get. So, I just absolutely love Sonny Gray here. Like, could he disappoint? Absolutely. It's baseball. But I think that, he should be 9,500 here. You had Charlie Morton 3 days ago pull 50% ownership at 9,700 against the Marlins. Gray has a higher strikeout percentage, a similar xFIP. They are pretty similar in terms of talent, and you're just getting a $1,300 discount here. And he's not getting as much ownership because you do have all these other pitchers to give ownership to. But it's just, I think, very, very clearly underpriced.
I'm with you. Looks really good. I don't have much else to say. You pretty much touched on every major piece here. Any Hernandez against the Reds? Because this isn't a particularly strong Reds lineup, but the park kind of sucks.
Yeah, it's not the best Reds lineup. And Hernandez is a pretty decent pitcher, but I don't really see getting to it on this slate just because there are so many good pitchers. None of them are pulling crazy amounts of ownership. When the best pitching options on the slate are pulling 30 to 40% ownership, I don't really mind. Hernandez it's one of these examples where, like, if you just look at him versus Sonny Gray at basically the same price, yeah, he probably shouldn't be laying 35-1 odds against Gray. That's insane. But you're talking about ownership over your entire lineup, not just one spot. You don't have to try and make a pivot at every single position to get like the most contrarian lineup you possibly can. If you're doing that, you're probably going to lose a lot of money pretty quickly. So it's just a situation where typically I'm going to be taking low owned stacks, low owned hitters, and that's going to afford me the ability to just put Sonny Gray into those lineups. So Hernandez is not a bad pitcher. It is a pretty tough matchup against the Reds in Cincinnati. But yeah, on a slate this big, I just don't really see myself getting to Hernandez.
Do you find yourself getting to any bats? I don't have the Marlins even remotely close, 22nd overall. I have the Reds 10th, but other than like Tyler Naquin's popping, nobody else is. Tyler Naquin's getting a lot of ownership. No one else is. I just don't really want to have any part of the bats in this game.
So I do kind of like stacking the Reds without Naquin in tournaments. And I'm not saying I think Naquin's a bad play. I just think this gives you a really contrarian stack because he's pulling 14% ownership. Nobody else is at 3. You get a lot of power with guys like Joey Votto, Nick Castellanos, Mike Moustakas. The issue is that, you do have to still weigh them against teams like Atlanta. I do think I get a little bit more Cincinnati now than I was this morning, though, just because Toronto's ownership came up so much. I think that probably lets me get a little bit more to teams like Cincinnati that are owned about where they should be, but I think looking at the individual hitters that have power are pretty low owned. So they're not a priority for me, but I do like the spot for the Reds in terms of just the ceiling hitting in Great American against, Hernandez is good, but not a great Miami bullpen behind them.
No Marlins, right?
No.
Rays and White Sox. 4.2 run implied total for the Rays, 4.3 for the White Sox. It's Michael Wacha. It's Lucas Giolito. Giolito, 12% owned. I think that he should be a little bit higher than that. Just 9,200 on DK, 9,800 on FanDuel. Michael Wacha's at 2%. That's probably about right. I think the bigger question is, what do you want to do with Giolito, given how strong the pitching slate is at the top?
I think the ownership makes sense on Giolito just because it's an awkward spot. It's a really, really tough spot because not only are there 3 pitchers that, well, 4 pitchers if you're going to include Snell, but that have higher strikeout percentages. 3 of those guys are just in really good spots too. Ray against the Tigers overall is a good spot. And then you're getting Gray against Miami and Sale against Texas, 2 of the best spots you can possibly have. So when you look at Giolito, it makes it even riskier taking him against Tampa Bay, a team that has a 116 WRC plus against right-handed pitching this year. They do also strike out at a high clip, and Giolito has struck out about 28% of hitters this year. So there's a very high ceiling for Giolito, but it's just a riskier spot than it is for some of these other pitchers. So I think that it makes sense that he's getting around 12% ownership. He's the kind of guy where, and we'll say the same thing with Lance McCullers later, or at least I will, where if I do have a stat where, I have Tyler Naquin in there, or I have some Yankees or whatever, a little bit more popular one-offs or stacks or whatever. That's where, maybe I'll go to Giolito over Gray or Giolito over Sale, something like that, just to get a little bit of an ownership discount. But where I have more contrarian bats, I would just think those other guys project quite a bit better than Giolito.
Okay. So I have it right now, Ray/Sale, 1, 2, whatever order you want to pick. I don't really care. Buehler, Giolito, basically the exact same order. McCullers a pretty clear 5th at the top. So we'll see where that actually ends up by the time we get to lock. I don't think that we need to touch on Michael Wacha at all. Do we need to touch on bats? White Sox, 16th for me, probably not the best spot. Rays, I mean, I don't think Giolito is probably pulling enough ownership to make the Rays more appealing. Would you want to see that higher, or do you like them in general?
So I don't think I really get to the Rays the way things look right now. If hypothetically Atlanta starts picking up a bunch more ownership and teams like Colorado, the Yankees, and the Blue Jays also continue to somehow pull ownership, I don't really know exactly how that would happen. But if something like that happens, then teams like Tampa will start to pop for me a little bit more, just because they at least have the power and the upside to rival those teams, even though the matchup against Giolito is nowhere near as good. But the way it looks right now, there's teams that are in matchups that I like that aren't getting much ownership. So I'm not going to get to much Tampa Bay, even though they do have a ton of power. I think the other side's actually a little bit more interesting. Michael Wacha has really really had issues with right-handed power his entire career, and this year's been no different. 261 expected ISO to righties. You have guys like Eloy Jimenez and Jose Abreu that have a lot of power from the right side, but the one spot that really jumps out is that Luis Roberts hitting second again tonight at 3K. He's a really good value option that also gives you power upside. So I think he's a nice combination of just savings and someone that still has the ability to do a lot of damage in your lineup.
I think the White Sox side has some spots. Probably not a team that I'm trying to stack at all, but I do have a couple of bats that are popping, and I like the Lou Bob shout because 3K hitting second, that's pretty important.
Yeah, any of these guys, like looking at the ownership right now, Robert at 10% is perfectly fine. But also, like Jimenez 1%, Abreu 1%, Anderson 1%. You don't really need to necessarily be going to 5 of those guys, but any of them are just going to make your lineup contrarian if you're mixing them in. You only need 1 or 2 guys like that in a lineup, and you kind of have set the stage for what you need to happen to have a big tournament day.
Anything else for Rays and White Sox?
Nope.
Cleveland Future Guardians. Los Angeles Angels 4.8 run implied total for Cleveland, 4.7 for the Angels. The only thing that makes me happy in life is the fact that doesn't make you happy in life. And that's all I'm really looking for. Sam something or other going for Cleveland. Jaime Barria going for the Angels. Neither guy pulling any ownership, nor should they, as far as I'm concerned. Any pitchers for you?
No interest in the pitching.
Cruising through it. Cleveland, 6th overall for me in terms of my top stacks, 4th in leverage. So I think we're going to need to touch on them a little bit. Angels, 8th, probably properly owned. Who's your preference?
Preference, I think, would be the Angels, just because I think the matchup's a little bit better. Sure. They also have Shohei Ohtani on their team, but neither one is really a stack that I expect to get to a whole lot of here. Cleveland projected to be a little bit overowned. The Angels about where they should be, but still kind of middle of the pack in terms of top stack percentage. It's more so there's individual hitters from both teams that stand out. I think from the Angels, Shohei Ohtani's a given, but also $2,700 Justin Upton, just kind of a mispricing on him. He should be more expensive in a good matchup here against Henkes, or however you pronounce his name. Still can't get it right, but it's a pretty good matchup for him. He's just underpriced. He is getting about 12% ownership. You're seeing that with a lot of these guys that are, right around 3K and in good matchups. Beyond that, not much to see here, I don't think, on the Angel side. On the Indian side, Jose Ramirez and Franmil Reyes, both expensive, but both really good, powerful hitters, and not a bad matchup here at all against Jaime Barria. You have a cheap leadoff hitter in Miles Straw that also is reasonable. Same goes for Bradley Zimmer at 2,400, but I don't anticipate getting a lot of 5-mans. It's more so just, using Ramirez to round out third base, using Justin Upton as a value bat in the outfield, stuff like that makes sense.
I have Cleveland's expected runs like more than a half run above this number. We touched on a little bit on the strategy show earlier today that Jaime Barria is just bad, like pretty aggressively bad in everything for a couple of years. And I think that I'm driving that a little bit forward. So I think that's what's pushing Cleveland up for me. I think they're going a little bit underrepresented here. Miles Straw, 2,700 in the leadoff spot, only 4.5% ownership. That feels like a pretty good number if you're looking for someone cheap. I don't have to advocate all that hard for Jose Ramirez or Franmil Reyes. Those are guys that you should just be rostering when you roster these teams. Franmil Reyes at 1.5%, by the way, if you're trying to buy a cheap home run. This is a team that I'm a little bit more interested in, and it just doesn't appear that people are actually getting there. Wilson Ramos is pulling the most ownership at 10%. I think it's correct, but I would be happy to just leave him off and get an even more unique stack, because it's not like he's a giant priority. It's the $2,800 price tag doing the talking.
Yeah, but at the same time, then you're wasting a one-off spot on a catcher. Like, I would think most of my Indian stacks are going to have Ramos. If I were stacking the Indians.
On a day like today, I don't mind wasting a one-off spot on a catcher, because chances are you're going to be able to get a good one.
Yeah, I mean, like there's good catching options, but there's still going to be better hitters at other positions that,
sure,
you can use.
I'm just looking through it now. Like, how much is Ramos? 2,800. So Ramos is my number 2 catcher. Travis d'Arnaud is 3 for me. $1,500 more expensive. Yeah, I guess 10% isn't really going to be that big of a deal. On the Angel side, feel free to grab Ohtani or Upton. Those 2 guys are good. Ohtani's really good. Justin Upton is mispriced.
Yeah.
Anything else for Cleveland or the Angels?
Nope.
I miss BJ Upton, man.
Yeah, he hasn't played in probably like 5 years now or something.
Oh, it's got to be a long time. Now I just want to know. Old Boss Man Jr. 2016 with the Blue Jays.
Damn, I'm good.
I He's 36 years old. We are the same age. That's crazy.
You are old.
This is super true. How much money did he make in his career? 89 million. Good for him.
That's good.
Good. Yeah. Get that paper. All right. We got a little bit more to talk about here, including promo time. Deep breath. We'll start with free soccer. English Premier League is back. Big slate tomorrow. So we've got soccer DFS projections. You can get them for free for a week if you use the promo code FREESOCCER. That is the Awesemo Plus soccer package. You got to dip your toe in the water for a little bit of soccer. Trust me, I'm going to get Adam converted by the end of this season.
Nope.
Trust me on this one. I've never been more right about it.
My best friends are all soccer players. I went to college with them. Still never happened.
Sounds like you're a terrible friend. Anyway, if you're looking for NFL projections and the like, boy, are you in luck. Use the promo code BLITZ. It's our Awesemo NFL Plus package that you will get, and it's the annual package. 25% off, in fact, and we do not normally do discounts that big on our annual packages. You don't want to miss it. Player projections, ownership, top stacks, premium slack, and more. If you're planning on playing NFL DFS and thinking about subscribing at Awesemo, you should use this promo code right now. You're not going to find a better deal throughout the rest of the season. This is going to save you a lot of money. Just move that money directly into contests. That's the play. But we're not done yet. Use the promo code WR to get our Awesemo Fantasy Football Draft Kit. It's now available for season long, for best ball. I know I'm using it. Same projections, tools, analysis that we normally do for NFL DFS, but we're transitioning that to season long and best ball. You get the Draft Wingman, fantastic tool. I'll be showing you guys what that looks like on Monday. Best ball ranking, stack guide, trade value chart, and more. You can get up to a $35 credit to Underdog and FFPC leagues. You can get this package for 33% off by using that promo code. You're basically paying less than $10 for everything that we have to offer. It's a great deal. We've got a ton of good stuff for best ball and for season long. I know Adam's a big best ball guy. I am dipping my toe in the water. I'm not normally an NFL guy. I like the concept. I might have to do some NBA best balls this year. That seems like it would be more up my alley. But either way, using the Draft Wingman makes it super easy. You guys should check that out. 524, we're good. 540 viewers, only 85 likes. That right there does not work for me. Let's hit that thumbs up. Let's run that number up a bit. We could use it. Astros and Mariners, 4.8 run implied total for the Stros, 3.7 for the Mariners. It's Lance McCullers and Yusei Kikuchi. No ownership coming to Kikuchi, 13% ownership coming to McCullers. How do you feel about McCullers? And do you have any interest in Kikuchi, who, while isn't owned, is still good?
He's good, but I just don't really see a reason to get to him against Houston with any sort of frequency here. McCullers, you kind of can just run back everything I said about Lucas Giolito and apply it to McCullers. He walks too many guys. So he's always somebody that's kind of scary in DFS because he runs the risk of just driving his pitch count up, getting in trouble, and not going as deep into the game as you would like. But outside of his 11% walk percentage, 3.75 xFIP is good, 27.7% strikeout percentage is good. He's a good overall pitcher. And the matchup here against Seattle isn't bad either. They have some bats that can do some damage, but also plenty of strikeouts in their lineup. And it's not a bad spot for McCullers. It's just that he's close to the same salary as Chris Sale. He's not as good as Sale, and Sale has a better matchup. He's more expensive than Gray. He's not as good as Gray, and Gray has a better matchup. And he's almost the same price as Ray. He's not as good as Ray, and Ray has a better matchup. So kind of just the same thing as Giolito. The one thing to point out with McCullers, he is 84, 85, 86, somewhere in there, 100 on FanDuel. So he's like $200 or $300 more expensive than Sonny Gray. I think that is a spot where he makes sense as a tournament pivot to Gray there, because you can get that same build where the guys like Ray and Sale and Bueller are all really priced up. And then you're getting this discount on McCullers. So you can actually do some different things with bats. And, I'm assuming Gray is going to have more ownership. But on DraftKings, I think the ownership on McCullers makes sense. I just kind of view him in an identical light to Lucas Giolito, where he has a high ceiling. He certainly can have a good game here. In lineups where I need an ownership discount on pitching, I will have no issue getting to McCullers or Giolito, but I'm not prioritizing them over guys like Sale or Gray or Ray.
Is there any way to get to bats in this game? I mean, the Mariners seem almost totally off limits, just given that total and the fact that they're sort of average. At least the Astros have a lot of talent in the lineup, but I'm not sure I really want to target against Kikuchi. I'm never mad if I end up with Astros, but today doesn't feel like the day.
Yeah, I mean, the only real argument I can make for the Astros is I think I've lost about $10,000 stacking them over the last 3 days, and I don't think I'm going to roster them today. So outside of insightful analysis like that, I don't have a lot.
Yeah, I had Altuve pop in 3%, Brantley, Correa, and Alvarez pop in 2%. That's like the most that I could say. If you get like 1 or 2 of them in 150, it seems reasonable. But
yeah, it's just one of those. I mean, nobody watching needs us to tell them that Yordan Alvarez, Carlos Correa, and Jose Altuve are capable of having good baseball games. It's just, there's a lot of really good teams on tonight's slate.
Yeah, if you're going to come in here and be like, the part of the stack I like the most is Chas McCormick, Jake Myers, and Martin Maldonado, then you would have a take.
Right.
It would be a terrible take, but you would have a take at that point. I don't have anything else for Astros or Mariners. Any one-off Mariners bats against McCullers?
I don't really think so. It's kind of just, it's not to say that, Haniger or Seager can't have a good game, but in the context of all of the other options, I just don't really see any of them as priorities.
Brewers and Nationals, 5.2 run implied total for the Brew Crew, 3.8 for the Nats. Brett Anderson and I still believe it's Pat Corbin, but I don't think that has been announced yet.
It's been confirmed.
It has?
Yeah.
He's officially on MLB.com. Wasn't before we started the deeper dive. It had to be pretty close.
Yeah, it was, I want to say, like an hour or so before.
Okay.
I think I got the notification as I was finishing the deep dive, and I was like, well, that's good because I didn't even know it was in question.
There we go. Any interest in Anderson or Pat Corbin?
No, I don't have interest in the pitching. For one, neither one's really cheap. And for two, neither one's really good. Patrick Corbin has a tough matchup against the Brewers. He has fallen off a cliff this year, only striking out about 18% of hitters, allowing almost 2 home runs per 9 innings. Don't really see a need to get there. And then Brett Anderson just only striking out 14.7% of hitters. He has a good matchup against Washington. If this were a smaller slate or a slate where we just had dumpster fire pitching everywhere, you could make a case, but I'm just not someone that on slates where you have a lot of strikeout pitchers and they're not all getting tons of ownership, I just never really get to the guy where you need him to go like 7 innings to have any chance at being one of the top pitchers.
Is there any interest to you in either one of these offenses?
Yeah, I like Milwaukee quite a bit here.
Okay, talk to me.
Corbin has, like I said, just really struggled this year. Almost 2 home runs per 9 innings overall. Against righties in particular is where he's really struggled. Only a 17.5% strikeout percentage, 224 expected ISO, 371 expected WOBA. I don't think that sets up very well for a lineup that has 7 right-handed bats in it. And there's plenty of power here as well. Willie Adames has power. Tyrone Taylor's cheap and leading off. Escobar, Garcia, Urias, these guys all can hit for power. Manny Pena is a reasonable catcher option. Like, he has power for an 8-hole catcher that people probably won't really roster. And you're just not getting a lot of ownership going to Milwaukee. Right now, they're projected for like 1% aggregate ownership. And it's a situation where on the one hand, I get it. They have a 5.2 implied run total, which is good. But in the context of this slate where you have a Coors Field game and then you have teams like the Yankees and the Braves and the Blue Jays facing minor league pitchers, they're just not going to stand out. But it is still a really high upside spot for Milwaukee, I think.
I'm fine going to a little bit of Milwaukee. They all grade out 2 to 3% better than the current ownership that they're pulling. I just don't know if they're going to drive high enough in the list to really end up mattering, given if the ownership holds right now, the amount of Braves that I would have is really, really staggering. And once you take that out of there,
the ownership to come up a little bit
because it's like you end up being pretty limited afterwards because they're just in such a great spot and so low owned, like the leverage itself. And we're talking probably north of 20%. Like that seems super reasonable to me.
Yeah.
All right. What else do we got here? Anything on the opposite side of this one? Anything for the Nats?
Obligatory Juan Soto is really good at hitting baseballs mentioned.
That he is. Okay. Well, let's keep that moving then. And go to, let's see, 14, 13, 12.
I'll mention something that might actually be useful outside of Juan Soto is good. Okay. We've mentioned a lot of, 3K, give or take, hitters that are getting like 10 to 15% ownership. I kind of mentioned it. So we don't have Tyrone Taylor in our ownership projections yet, but at 3,300, I think he's another one of those guys that might get a little bit of ownership, but it's still a good play. On the other side, though, Victor Robles only projected for 2% ownership. Brett Anderson, a 15% strikeout percentage with a 186 expected ISO against righties this year. Only 2,400 on Robles. I really don't mind that as just a lower owned version of like Tyler Naquin, basically.
I like it. I ran during my sim, since we don't have Taylor in the ownership. I have Taylor at 8%. Everybody else on the team is either like 2, 3, or Rowdy Tellez gets to 4, and they're not really pulling any ownership. So I'm assuming Taylor gets to like the 6 or 7 range. I like that Robles shout though. Cardinals, that's not how the Cardinals, that's not how you spell it. Cardinals and Pirates, 5-run implied total for the Cardinals, 3.6 for the Pirates. Miles Mikolas and Mitch Keller. Mikolas pulling a little bit of ownership, 3%. Any interest?
Yeah, just I don't really think it's gonna be that necessary to go to this inexpensive price range on this slate, because I think there are enough value bats that have relatively low ownership. You'll be able to round out your lineups pretty easily. But for whatever reason, if you do need to get down into this like 7K range, I think Michaelis is fine. He threw 86 pitches in his last rehab start, 7 innings. He's not a great strikeout pitcher, but overall, he's not a bad pitcher either. For his career, he's got a 4.05 xFIP. And most importantly, the Pirates are just a really bad offensive team. So I think getting a essentially fully stretched out Michaelis against the Pirates at 6,900, it's not that I'm looking to play him over these really good high strikeout pitchers that we've talked about, but none of those pitchers cost less than $8,000 really. So in some lineups, I think he's going to be helpful, and I think he's the best option in his price range.
I'm going to officially stop calling him Mikolas now that they have changed the pronunciation on Baseball Reference.
I didn't know if you were doing that just to try and piss me off again, or if you thought that was how it's pronounced.
No. So it used to be listed on the pronunciation guide as like capital M, capital E, capital E. And it was really weird to me, but he's like, it's a Greek name. I was like, okay, that makes some sense, I guess, because I remember whiffing on it 3 years ago when I didn't know what it was then either. So I pulled it up again to be like, am I fucking this up? It turns out that the answer is absolutely yes. So Miles Michaelis, sorry for that one, man. You and your lack of a strikeout rate. I apologize to you. Any Mitch Keller?
I don't really see it here. It's a Cardinals team that doesn't strike out a lot. They're not the best offense, but they're not bad. And the other thing is that Keller's strikeout rate has just dropped off this year. Used to be someone that got a lot of strikeouts in addition to getting blown up. Now he kind of just gets blown up. So he should be good. Like, he has really good stuff. He's just a pitcher in the Pirate system, and they have no idea what to do with those. So he's probably going to be bad until they get rid of him, and he's like 28 and goes to some other team and has success. So for right now, not interested in rostering Keller.
Okay. Are you interested in rostering either side of this game from a bats perspective? I don't really love the Pirates given that run total. I think the Cardinals run total is a bit inflated for this spot. I'm surprised that it's as high as it is. So I'm a little anti-Cardinals, although there are certainly some spots that I'd be happy to have.
I think the Cardinal spot is fine. Like, right before we got to this game, someone in chat asked if the Cardinals were a good stack. And yes, like they are. It's a good spot against Keller. The reason that I don't think I end up getting to a ton of them is just that I think they have a similar chance of success to other teams like the Brewers, for example, who are just going to get less ownership because they're a little bit more expensive, a little bit more difficult to get to. I think guys like Tyler O'Neill, Tommy Edman are both good plays. Goldschmidt and Arenado are pretty much always good. You get some value at catcher with Molina, and Newt Barr's hitting 6th at 2,300 again. It's a good spot. The Cardinals are an okay offense. 5.1 implied run total is not bad, especially for most of their salaries. So, like, yeah, I think they're good in the sense that there's a pretty good chance they have a good game offensively. They're not my favorite stack, though, when you factor in everything else like ownership and chances of success versus some of the other teams that aren't getting a lot of ownership.
I can't get over Lars Nootbaar's name. That is just fantastic. It's just something you don't see every day.
Where do you know where he's from?
The Netherlands is my first guess, but I have no idea. California.
Yeah.
Yep. What is the? I don't want to say it the way that I'm about to say it, but like,
he's Dutch.
Okay. I was gonna say I need a kid to, like, in the spelling bee to ask for nation of origin on that word, because like that's all I'm looking for here. Yeah. Okay. Well, nailed it, I guess. I feel pretty good about it. Not that like I was out on a limb saying Netherlands.
Yeah, his father is Dutch.
Yeah, pretty clear here. Any Pirates bats?
No, I'm good.
Yeah, I didn't think so. I'm just copying an updated crunch because we had the Phillies and Angels lineups come up, and I wanted to make sure I get my updates in here. So give me 1 second, get a quick click in, see if anything has changed. Not really. So we've got 4 games left to go, which means it is time to talk a little bit about the presenting sponsor of this show. That would be OddsShopper. One of the biggest edges you're going to find in sports betting is simply being able to shop around for better lines. You don't want to leave better lines on the table. It's just costing you money, doesn't really benefit anybody else. So you're just hurting yourself. OddsShopper is the perfect answer for that. You get the opportunity to look at multiple sports books at the same time, whether it's sides or totals. You could also get player props and team futures, all sorts of good stuff, all updated in real time. You can set alerts for notifications if lines move in a direction you're looking for. Our player props for MLB have expected win percentages and expected ROI based on all of our projections for the DFS space. So you get very quick sorting. Boom. This is the top expected ROI prop. I'm just going to take it because the Awesemo guys are saying that I should. You look across the line, grab the best line you can, click into it. It doesn't get much easier than that. And it costs you absolutely nothing, not a cent, not a dime. This is free. Go to oddshopper.com, sign up, make an account, start tracking your bets. It's a good place for you to start. If you're looking to get into sports betting, this should be the place you start. It's not going to be any easier for you, and you're going to find a lot of quality information that saves you some money. Newt mainly worked in the agriculture sector. I guess this is his dad. Thanks, Team McBride.
His grandfather was a noted businessman, Herbert Newt.
Oh, yes. In the 1940s, he was the vice CEO of Ralston Purina, now owned by the Swiss company Nestle. He was the president of the National Grain and Feed Association, which is a thing that I didn't know was a thing. All right, we're off the course. 6.5 run implied total for the Rockies, 4.9 for the Diamondbacks. Austin Gomber, Tyler Gilbert. I don't have a no-hitter joke again. I don't want to roster Tyler Gilbert. I don't really have a ton of interest in Austin Gomber. I do want to say, I think the Rockies are pretty dramatically overprojected. I think the Diamondbacks are also pretty dramatically underprojected from a runs perspective. I have this game a lot closer. The Rockies are favorites by like 0.6 of a run, and I think this game should be more like a coin flip. So I'm anxious to hear your thoughts. Let's start here, though. Gomber or Gilbert?
Gomber. So kind of like we were talking about with Michaelis, I don't think I'm going to need a $5,900 pitcher very much given the price of bats. But if for whatever reason I did need a pitcher 6K or below, I think the answer is Austin Gomber. He's just a pretty good pitcher that's better than a $5,900 price tag, even pitching in cores. He's made 8 starts at home this year, 42 and a third innings pitch, about a 23% strikeout percentage, xFIP below 4. Overall for the season, he struck out about 24% of hitters, 3.88 xFIP. He's just a pretty good pitcher. He's not somebody that I think I'm going to need a lot of here, but if you do need to pay down, I think Gomber is a reasonable option on DraftKings.
Okay. Well, let's talk a little bit about the offenses then. Rockies are my top stack, but they are 24th in leverage out of 28 teams. Not pulling as much ownership as I was totally expecting, but we're talking about a pretty heavy chalk team. Diamondbacks, I have 5th, 11th overall. And if I made any adjustments to their run total right now, I think I would see this happening a little bit differently. And I think that the Diamondbacks would be a little bit higher for me. Do you like a particular side of this game? Do you like both sides of this game? Are you avoiding it? How do you feel about this entire course matchup? Go whichever direction you'd like.
Sorry, I'm arguing with, are you the one that said Curacao or somebody else running the Awesemo?
That was me.
Okay. Yeah. Curacao plays for the Netherlands in the World Baseball Classic.
Okay. Thank you. I knew that both of those things, like I felt right when I said it. And then I immediately was like, no, I'm for sure he's from Curacao.
He is. But yeah, Jones also, Andrew Jones also on that team. But anyway, I think the Diamondbacks, I think, are going a little bit over-owned here. I think there's some good value. Nick Ahmed at 3,200. Just you shouldn't have $3,200 leadoff hitters in Coors Field against even like average to slightly above average pitchers like Gomber. Same can be said for Asdrubal Cabrera at 3K flat. Ketel Marte is underpriced at 4,600. Carson Kelly is fine at 4,500. Like these guys are all I think a little bit cheaper than they should be given the park that they're hitting in. But I do think it's not the best matchup against Gomber, and I do think the ownership's going to be there. So I don't mind them in cash if you need some savings. I don't mind them, with lower owned players in tournaments. But I don't think Arizona is going to be a stack that I'm really targeting that heavily. I think the spot's better for Colorado. I don't think Tyler Gilbert's likely to be very good. Yes, he threw a no-hitter in his first major league start, but he's an almost 28-year-old basically non-prospect that has been a relief pitcher in the minors for his whole career until this season. He had like a 5.4 xFIP at AAA this year. I don't think he's likely to be very good. The Rockies aren't great, but I think you get a good value bat in Connor Joe. Like, he's an average to slightly below average hitter in the major leagues, but just like with Nick Ahmed, he shouldn't be $3,400 leading off in cores against a average to probably below average pitcher in Gilbert. Trevor Story is always great. Rogers is fine. CJ Cron is one of my favorite first base plays. I think it's pretty much between him and Luke Voigt. 4,900 for Cron, who has just been insanely good in Coors Field this year, as you would expect. So I like the Rockies a little bit more. I do think that, maybe they shouldn't have a 6.8 implied run total because they're just not that good of an offense. But I do think that they should be favored here as opposed to it being basically a coin flip.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm testing it out, seeing if I move the line closer to what I was thinking. Two things. One, get in the next Gretzky queue.
Thanks.
Two, oh God, I lost it. Oh, perfect. We get a lot of people popping up in chat from time to time that are willing to look at small samples as if they're really important. And I think that Tyler Gilbert is like the perfect way to talk about this. He did not give up a hit in his first game. Any one of these small sample people would never be like, well, he's never going to give up a hit again. So like, everybody immediately looks at that and regresses it in their head.
Tyler Gilbert's hot.
Right. So like, everybody knows intuitively that you have to regress that he's not just going to only throw no-hitters moving forward. The problem ends up lying in that most people just don't know how aggressively they need to do that. And I think this is the perfect example to sort of explain it. Yeah, like Cantor says, Sean V would say that though, right? Like, he would provide some sort of like, oh, he's thrown one start and had a no-hitter, implying that he should like only have no-hitters. The regression in baseball for stuff like this is massive. Thousands of plate appearances potentially, depending on the particular stat. Tyler Gilbert's first start in baseball is what amounts to basically meaningless in trying to determine how he's going to do today. Sorry, Tyler Gilbert. Look, you had an awesome option. First game was great. It's never going to get any better than that. Sorry, buddy. Anything else, Rockies, Diamondbacks?
No.
I had to fill a little bit of time. We're running kind of early.
I forgot how many people play for this Netherlands World Baseball Classic team.
Anybody else that's fun?
Sidney Ponson, Rick Vandenhurt, Jerkson Profar, Andrelton Simmons.
I remember Profar. I wouldn't have thought about Simmons, but I guess I did know that. Sidney Ponson still does?
No. Just he's from Aruba.
Okay. I was like, oh my God, like he's got to be late 40s, I guess.
Probably.
I mean, he could be dead and I wouldn't know.
He's 44.
Okay. Yeah. Former Oriole.
Couple times.
5th in the Rookie of the Year. I don't think you ever want to go back a couple times.
He was part of that big offseason when they brought in Miguel Tejada, Javi Lopez, and Rafael Palmeiro.
Yeah. Won a bunch of World Series, right?
Yeah.
His last, so starting in 2005, negative, -0.1, -0.2, negative. Those are his wins above replacement. So he maintained in the league for like 7 years and was not worth like the plane ticket that he was taking to go to games.
Yeah, he bounced around quite a bit after his second stint with the Orioles.
All right, A's and Giants, 4.4 run implied total for the A's, 4.6 for the Giants. James Caprillion, Alex Wood, no ownership to either guy. Do you want to get to either one of these arms?
Not really, just because the slate's so big. And neither matchup is good. Like, the A's are tough to strike out. They have a lot of good hitters. Alex Wood's a perfectly fine pitcher, but I don't think talent-wise he's on the level with a lot of the other pitchers on this slate that we're going to be getting to. And then the matchup's really tough. And then the same goes for Caprillion. You know, he's not a bad pitcher by any stretch. He's struck out about 24% of hitters this year. 4.45 xFIP is a little elevated. It's over a run higher than his ERA, but on a lot of slates, he'd still be a useful guy, but he's facing one of the better offenses in baseball here. He's not discounted. I just don't really see getting to either guy.
Yep. Same page. 3% for Wood, 2% Caprillion means that I'm not really interested in either one of these sides. Do you get to either one of the bats, whether that's the A's or the Giants, both above average offenses, but it's really not a great spot. It's a tough Oakland Park. I have the A's 24th overall. I have the Giants 11th. I just don't really have much of a take other than Tommy La Stella looks solid at 2,400.
Yeah, I don't really see much here either. So a lot of the Giants are priced fairly. Brandon Belt at 3,900, just I think a really good hitter that people don't realize how good he is because he spent his whole career on the Giants. La Stella's really cheap. Wade's really cheap. Crawford's cheap. Like any of those guys are fine to round out a lineup, but it's just not going to be a team that I get to lots of. And the ownership is about where it should be as well. So that's not helping. And then on the other side with Oakland, you don't even really get many discounted bats there. You know, Olson's really expensive. Marte's really expensive. The pricing on Gomes and Kana is fine, but tough park to hit in. Only supposed to be about 60 degrees on top of that. Just really, really tough to get here on the main slate, I think.
Yeah. I don't have anything on the A's side. Yan Gomes at 2% was the most that anybody popped. Tough spot. I just don't want to go there.
Same.
Yeah. 2 more games. Padres and Phillies. I'm getting multiple DMs about Kongs from Ben. They were 0.75 this morning, and they are flying off the shelves right now. 5.3 run implied total for the Padres, 3.7 for the Phillies. Now we get to have a little bit of a discussion. Blake Snell going for the Pods. Matt Moore going for the Phillies. This is not a good Phillies lineup. That's neither here nor there. We've got Blake Snell projected for 26% ownership, although I guess I haven't pulled ownership in a while. I assume it's still in the same ballpark. 39 minutes ago was the last one. Blake Snell at 25. Perfect. Blake Snell at 25% ownership. Talk to me about it. How do you feel about Blake Snell's ownership for today?
I think it's higher than it should be right now. He's got a really, really high ceiling because he strikes out 28.5% of hitters. That's the same strikeout percentage as Sonny Gray. The only people with a higher one on the slate are Sale and Ray. So from a ceiling standpoint, Snell's pretty cheap at 8K. The issue is just that he has so much trouble with efficiency because not only does he strike out 28.5% of hitters, he walks 13.8%. And so you get him not going very deep into games. He's thrown at least 100 pitches in 3 straight starts, which is good to see, but he still has failed to throw more than 5 innings in 2 of those 3. So it kind of just highlights those issues. The ceiling's extremely high. It's just the probability that he gets there is still not that high because he walks guys, puts so many extra guys on base, makes it more likely he gets unlucky on a hit and gives up a couple of runs. Also just takes points away from him on DraftKings. The lineup is not terrible for him. There was a chance Rhys Hoskins was going to be back today. He's not. You have Jorge Bonifacio back from wherever he's been. He's hitting 6th. Ronald Torreyes, Lucas Williams in the pitcher spot, rounding out the order. So not a bad lineup for Snell. I think it's a little bit better than we thought it was going to be, but still getting 26% ownership. Like, I don't think he should be getting 1.5 times the ownership that Max Fried is getting at basically that price point. I don't think his ownership should be as close to Sonny Gray as it is either.
I had Blake Snell show up in 8% of lineups. I had Max Fried show up in 9. I think you can make a case that Snell should be slightly higher just because he has an upside that doesn't generally exist in that sort of price range. But when push comes to shove, I think 24% or 25% ownership is too much. I think he is over-owned, and he is a guy that I would like to be lighter on. And if he beats me, he beats me.
Somebody said he's turned it around. He walked 2 his last start in 5 innings, 3 before that, 3 before that, 4 before that, 3 before that. I don't know when this turnaround came.
It hasn't. Normally I would ask you about thoughts on the Padres since they are projected for a 5.3 run implied total, but I really want to ask you, what are your thoughts on the Phillies as a leverage stack against the Blake Snell ownership?
I like it on the night slate. I don't think I'll get to it on the main. For one, Jorge Bonifacio doesn't appear to be in the player pool, so you're just losing the 6 hitter. The 7 hitter sucks. The 8 hitter sucks. The 9 hitter is the pitcher. So it's already just kind of a really difficult team to stack. And then you run into the same issue of Snell can have a disappointing start. Like, he can easily score 13, 14 fantasy points, not really do anything for you at 8K. And the Phillies still aren't doing anything for you as an offense either. So I think on the 3-game night slate, they make sense because you're just going to get even higher ownership on Snell. But on the full slate, I don't anticipate getting the Philly.
Let's see. Do I have access to it quick? We won't have that up there yet. All right. Well, then let's talk a little bit about the Padres. I have them 7th overall, but I have them as the 2nd most over-owned team. The problem is there's not really like an easy way to measure this stuff because they're not owned as a team. Fernando Tatis is owned probably more than everyone else combined. Let me just check it. 24.6% for Tatis and 20.2% ownership for all other guys in their lineup. What are your thoughts on rostering San Diego against Matt Moore? It feels pretty good.
Yeah, I think it's a good spot. Tatis getting outfield eligibility on both DraftKings and FanDuel makes it a lot easier to roster him as well. And it's just a situation where, like you said, he's pulling a lot of ownership, but he should be. He's Fernando Tatis facing Matt Moore. Outside of that, the highest owned guy on DraftKings right now is Manny Machado at 6%. Nola's at 3. You can go to lefties against Matt Moore. He has had issues with left-handed power for most of his career. He doesn't really care who he gives up home runs to. He just likes to do it. 248 expected ISO against lefties since last year. Limited sample. I guess actually that's all this season. So limited sample, but giving up power there. If you go back to 2019, it's a 243 expected ISO. 2018. 246. These are all still pretty limited samples for him, but he's never been dominant against lefties. And guys like Frazier and Cronenworth and Hosmer are good enough hitters that you can definitely go there. So you can either stack the Padres without Tatis and really have a contrarian team. You can stack them with Tatis and still have a pretty low owned team. I think the Padres look good. I think they're in the same kind of boat for me as teams like Milwaukee and Cincinnati.
Yeah. I have Pham, Cronenworth, and Frazier as the 3 most under-owned guys in the lineup. And if that's the case at 2%, 1%, I can bring Tatis along for the ride. I don't think his ownership matters all that much. I mean, it's higher than I want it to be, but he's also one of the best hitters in baseball, so I don't care.
Yeah, it doesn't matter a ton to me. It's not like he's 40% or something.
Right. Dodgers, Mets, final game of the slate. 5.2 run implied total for the Dodgers, 3.3 for the Mets. Walker Buehler, Carlos Carrasco, no ownership for Carrasco. Walker Buehler, the most expensive pitcher on the DraftKings slate at $10,500. He is projected for 15% ownership. How are you feeling about Buehler?
The same way I feel about McCullers and Giolito, basically. I think he's a better pitcher than both of those guys. He's arguably having the best season of anyone on the slate. 3.64 xFIP, 27% strikeout percentage, 6.8% walk percentage. He's a really, really good pitcher. Strikeout percentage is a little bit lower than some of the other pitchers that are a little less expensive. The matchup is fine, not quite as good as Texas or the Marlins or teams like that. But the big thing is just that, on DraftKings, he's $600 more than Ray. He's 12, I think, God, I'm bad at math. $800 more than Sale. So it's kind of similar to the way I view Giolito and McCullers. He's just the more expensive, better version, where if I need an ownership discount and I happen to have the money to go to Buehler over a Sale or a Ray, that's perfectly fine. He's a really good pitcher. He's probably going to have a good game, but I'm also not going to be going out of my way to sacrifice things to get the Walker Buehler over Chris Sale or something.
I feel like this is another spot where the line is too big, but the question then becomes, what do we make of Carlos Carrasco?
I don't really know, and that's why I like the Dodgers in tournaments. He's made 4 starts now since coming back from the injured list. He was perfectly fine in his first start, gave up, if I remember correctly, a leadoff home run to Jonathan India, and then was good the rest of the 4 innings, through 58 pitches there, 62 pitches against Miami in 4 1/3, 2 earned runs, whatever. But then against Washington, 1 inning, 33 pitches, 4 earned runs 2 starts ago. Followed that up against the Dodgers with 6 earned runs on 57 pitches over 2 innings. Carrasco, I think, if I had to just, bet a straight bet, is he still a good pitcher or not? I think he's probably still good. He's probably just working through rust coming back from injury, but there's still a relatively high chance that he's just washed for one reason or another, whether it's injury related or whatever, age related, anything. So there's still a relatively good chance that Carrasco just isn't very good. And we know these Dodgers are really good. He just got lit up by the Nats 2 starts ago, and then the Dodgers. The Dodgers can do damage against anybody. So I still think that with them not getting any ownership here, they are a pretty good team to stack in tournaments, because I think there's just a little bit wider margin for error, for lack of better wording. 5.3 implied run total is still good, but I think that they just have a better chance of just completely going nuts than most teams that have an implied run total in that range. So I like them at low ownership. They're similar. I'd said the Padres were similar to Milwaukee. I think the Dodgers are similar to Milwaukee. The Padres are similar to Cincy, where Atlanta's like the clear priority for me right now. I like teams like Boston and Toronto, especially if Toronto's ownership comes down a little bit. And then you have like Milwaukee and the Dodgers not really getting any ownership. The Reds and the Padres getting some aggregate ownership, but it's mostly going to like one guy that, you can either take or leave.
I like the Dodgers as a get different type stack, just in case Carrasco is cooked. They're not really pulling any ownership outside of Trey Turner. I don't get the sense there's any justification for the Mets against Buehler.
No, I don't really see any reason to get there.
Well, there we go. 5:57. So we still have a minute or two left. So hit me with this. I know you just kind of did, but we'll sum it up a little bit better. Favorite stacks for today?
Atlanta, Boston. With the way ownership looks right now, Atlanta, Boston, and I think Milwaukee.
All right. Atlanta for me. I'm not like all that upset about Rockies, Blue Jays, or Diamondbacks. I think there's some value there, but it's not going to be as aggressive for me. Cleveland would be the team that I think is going most under-owned. And I think the Yankees are the team that I find just pretty easy to avoid.
Yeah, like I think I agree with that. The only team that looks like they're getting crazy ownership that not crazy in that I don't get why they're getting it, but crazy that like I would expect to be avoiding it is the Yankees. Colorado is fine. Toronto, I think, is fine, especially because there's a couple of bats that are really pulling that ownership up. The teams that really look under-owned to me, my favorite teams that look under-owned are Atlanta. Atlanta, Boston, and Milwaukee.
Finish it up. Favorite pitchers for today?
Yeah, this is a pretty boring one. Sonny Gray, Chris Sale, and Robbie Ray.
They are the three highest ranked guys that I have. I'm happy to add Luke Giolito and Walker Buehler. I don't think that those are like hot takes or anything, but they're definitely a step behind those other three. Fade Blake Snell as far as I'm concerned.
Snell and the Yankees are the two spots that I understand why the ownership's there. It's going to be scary not to have them, but I doubt that I have them.
Well, there we go. Anything else you want to add for this slate?
No, I think that's it.
Well, there you have it, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us. We're going to give producer extraordinaire Chris Karen a little bit of time to make the switch for MLB Live Before Lock. But that is the end of the Deeper Dive. Good luck tonight, everybody. Stick around. Don't go anywhere. MLB Live Before Lock is about to get started on this stream. You don't have to change anything. Plus NFL Live Before Lock coming up at 7. Good luck. Enjoy your weekend. We'll talk to you again later.
We all know football season is the greatest time of year, but drafting season's a very close second. So whether you're drinking and drafting with your boys for your annual home league or preparing for your next high-stakes draft, the top priority remains the same: winning, and more specifically, winning money. And what better way to do that than by drafting a beauty? That's why you've got to check out our brand new draft kit at Awesemo.com, created by experts who have profited over $7 million playing fantasy sports. These guys are going to help you crush your drafts this year with tools like the Draft Wingman that's powered by projections from the #1 ranked daily fantasy sports player in the world, Awesemo himself, and includes a one-of-a-kind recommendation engine that takes into account your prior picks to ensure a well-rounded team and optimal draft. Draft Wingman is also outfitted with best ball-specific recommendations, including our stack highlighting feature, which helps you complete your all-important best ball stack. If you're looking for more details, or maybe you're already down to join us for an incredible NFL season, click the following link and use the promo code WR, that's WR, to get the entire draft kit for only $9.95. We'll see you over there. Yo, you're watching the Awesemo Fantasy Football Channel. I'm Dave Lochran. With me, as always, Matt Gajewski. And today we're closing out the series with tight end tiers. We already did running backs, wide receivers, quarterbacks. Check all of that out right here on the channel if you haven't done so yet. And then come back to it. Or watch this one first and then come back. Doesn't matter. The order is unimportant. What is important, though, is that we break all of these down and really basically touch on some serious strategy outside of just tiers as well. How are you drafting tight ends? how serious are the tiers when it breaks from Kelce to Waller to Kittle, so on and so forth, into the later rounds of the draft, whether it's standard league, just redraft, PPR, super flex, whatever it is, and more importantly, best ball. So Matt, a lot to dive into today. It's not a position that everyone gets super excited about, but it's a super important position when it comes to how you attack it.
Yeah, it's probably the most nuanced position we have. If you just look at your standard 12-team leagues, your team with Travis Kelce has a significant advantage over that number 12 team who's maybe streaming week to week and getting 5 or 6 points. So where you draft some of the more valuable tight ends is crucial to these overall fantasy drafts.
No doubt. And I think it's important to point out as well that, people look at tight ends and they say, I don't like drafting early tight ends. They're just not as good. But you have to consider a couple of things here. Travis Kelce was the 7th best PPR producer in the league last year. And I'm talking running back, wide receiver, and tight end, not just pass catchers. Darren Waller PPR formats was 10th. So both of these guys were top 10 in scoring, not at their positions, of course, not even as pass catchers, but among all skill players. So I think, Matt, it's important to consider not just that these guys are legitimate elite wide receivers playing a tight end position, but also how scarce the position is at tight end compared to other spots. Whereas if you're landing one of the 2, maybe 3 elite tight ends in this league, you're, as you kind of put it right there, you're head and shoulders ahead of everybody else as long as the rest of your draft looks solid.
For sure. You basically have a wide receiver 1 in your tight end position. And we know from experience, it's much easier to fill the wide receiver slots than it is the tight end slot. So there is a lot of merit to drafting them early.
Yeah, and I think you could also make an argument. I don't have any, quantifiable data on this, but it just kind of makes sense given how one position just doesn't produce as well on the whole, and it's also there's less of them. But it's got to be much easier to hit on late round wide receivers that end up, making starts for you than it would be to hit on late round tight ends.
For sure. Let's even just look back to last year. Some of the popular late round tight ends, Adam Troutman, Chris Herndon's been a popular late round tight end.
I gotta watch like all of these football videos that we're promoting. I gotta catch myself up.
There's a lot of them.
Got drafts coming up. We got DFS already kicking off, man. Gotta get on this.
It is the Awesemo MLB Live Before Lock, and we've got a lot going on today because not only do we have baseball right now, but the shows does not stop here. Right after this, we're going to have the NFL preseason Live Before Lock. So you guys are going to want to like this video, subscribe to the YouTube channel, and then also stick around for that. After Chris, by the way, I could still hear us talking in the background.
I'm hearing it, yeah.
It's okay. There we go. Now it's fixed. I don't know if the audience is able to hear that or not. But by the way, there's nothing worse than hearing the sound of your own voice. And I just had to listen to myself as I was talking. It was one of the worst things that's maybe ever happened to me. But I don't know if people were able to hear what I was hearing at home. But anyway, we've got a little NFL preseason Live Before Lock coming up after this. But Terry, how are you doing today?
Doing well, bud. Had you in stereo there for a sec. I was worried that it was me that was screwing up the broadcast, but this time I actually remembered to mute the YouTube channel. So yeah, doing good. To me, this looks like a fascinating slate. I'm looking forward to talking it through with you because I think there's just bunch of different directions that this could go between pitching, a lot of good hitting spots, Coors Field game, tons of teams over-owned, few spots under-owned. I love it. I'm excited about this one.
Yeah, so let's start by talking about some of the pitching here, because one thing that's very obvious from looking at the ownership, everybody's paying up for pitching. And the reason everybody's paying up for pitching is there's a lot of good pitchers on the slate. There are not very many good cheap pitchers on the slate. So how are you prioritizing that when building lineups? Are you only paying up for pitchers? Or are you finding some value guys to get to as well?
So, yeah, I mean, I think we're really faced with a slate that's loaded up with expensive pitchers. I think we do have interesting spots like Sonny Gray to me is pretty interesting despite heavy ownership. He's 8,300. You offset a decent amount of salary there on FanDuel, 84, same story on DK. McCullers is a little bit interesting at 8,500 on FanDuel in a similar kind of a vein. He's a lot more expensive on the DK slate, though. He just kind of slots in as an also ran with like Sale, Robbie Ray. So I think you can get a little bit of offset with those guys without really dumpster diving too much. And then there are guys that I'm willing to play in at least some shares. Like I don't mind getting to a few shares of, well, not Kikuchi, but maybe Alex Wood against the A's. Maybe certainly Max Fried. He's 8,900, so he's approaching that higher tier, but at least a little bit of savings against the Orioles, despite the park factors there. Miles McCollum could be interesting as kind of a dumpster dive against the weak Pirates lineup. So there are spots, I think, more so on the FanDuel slate, less so on the DK slate, where some of those guys are more even money. So I think it's just really interesting, but I think you're kind of forced to pay up because there's just such a differential between some of the top end and even the mid range, and let alone the bottom end, which is just, flattens out really, really quickly.
Yeah, and that's where I'm at too, is because I look at some of the offense that we have, in our top stacks that are popping up as under-owned. And the reason I think this is relevant to bring it up now when we talk about the pitching is the reason a lot of these offenses are looking to be under-owned is because they're expensive and nobody could get to them because everybody is paying up for pitching. So I'm kind of trying to find cheap pitchers I want to get to, but I just don't like any of them. So that'll be something we dive into as we talk through the pitchers. But as of right now, there is not a single pitcher who's picking up any sort of significant ownership that's under the 8K mark. So starting with some of these high-end pitchers, amongst the top of the pricing tier, where we have guys like Chris Sale, Sonny Gray mentioned, I'm still going to consider him amongst the kind of stud type pitchers on the slate. Robbie Ray, all of these guys projected for 30+% ownership. So which guys are the top of the pricing you prioritizing the most?
I mean, to me, I think Walker Buehler is super interesting, despite being the most expensive pitcher by a lot on the FanDuel slate. And then I believe, the highest priced guy on the DK slate by a fair margin as well. I think he's worth paying up for because I think that offsets so much ownership. On FanDuel, his ownership is microscopic. He's the third ranked pitcher on the slate in terms of probability of success, and he's going off at like 7x his probability of success to his ownership. So I really like that spot. I'm figuring out ways to pay for it. It works a lot with like 4-3-1 constructions on FanDuel. If you go to kind of a bargain play with your one-off, play some of the lower owned, less expensive stacks where we're finding some positive leverage, maybe attack one of the other positively leveraged pitchers. And there's a spot for that I like today. So I really like going to Walker Buehler despite the heavy price tag. I think he's fantastic. He's an excellent starter, leads the league in quality starts, gives you a tremendous amount of depth every time out. Going up against a relatively underperforming Mets lineup, Buehler's got a 27% strikeout rate now on the season. He had been down in the strikeout departments in the 24-25% range, but that's ticked up over the last month or so. 3.64 xFIP, 11.4% induced swinging strikes, only allows 36.3% hard hit. And the Mets just struggle. They've not been a very good team. Their owner called them out for it the other day here, and it was all over the New York tabloids. But they've got a 3.37% home run rate in the split, 11% below average creating runs, 24.8% strikeout rate against righties, 148 ISO. I think that's an attackable team with a pitcher of Buehler's quality. So I'm happy to get there when other people aren't.
Yeah, and I think that's really the key thing when you look at Walker Buehler is first price point 10,500 on DK, not quite as steep as his FanDuel price, but really one of the only pitchers on this high end range that we do have positively leveraged. We have a 15.4% chance, a 15.4% projected ownership for Walker Buehler, 18.7% chance being a top two pitcher. Over on FanDuel, like you mentioned, massively under-owned relative to our projections. Only a 1.2% ownership projection on Walker Buehler with a 7.8% chance to be a top pitcher. So all that in mind, Walker Buehler, if you do have the space to pay up for him, I think that he's fairly easy to get overweight to the field on because especially on FanDuel, if you're playing 10 lineups, you play him in one of them, or if you're playing 50 lineups, you play Buehler in one of them, you're overweight to the field on him. So he's somebody who's pretty simple to get overweight to. And then in terms of some of these other pitchers on the high end, going through the next tier guys, the ones that I think are most notable to compare, a couple of lefties that I think have a little bit of variance, but obviously significant amount of upside. That is Chris Sale and Robbie Ray. Robbie Ray's seen a little bit of a decrease in the last month or so. We've seen an uptick in his walks, an uptick in hard contact. Those are both concerns. Chris Sale brings in the issues of just, we've only seen him pitch once basically in the last couple of years. He was obviously one of the best starting pitchers in all of baseball a few years ago. But between Chris Sale and Robbie Ray, which of these high variance lefties do you like the most?
For me, it's Chris Sale all day long. I think he's the superior pitcher. The only question mark with Chris Sale is, of course, the innings. He went 5 his last start. He struck out 8, had a very good start for a first start back after it was 2 years and a day to the almost exactly 2 years since he had pitched in the majors after ending his season early in 2019. But he was phenomenal before that. He was one of the best pitchers in baseball, arguably the best pitcher in baseball leading into that. 30% career strikeout rate. I think he was around 36 and change that year in 2019 before he went down. He's just a phenomenal lefty. Awesome starter. He projects extremely well for me, just with like a 6-inning projection. And there's massive upside going up against that Texas team. They don't strike out as much as you might expect against left-handed pitching, but everything else they're just flat bad at, among the worst marks against either hand in the league. So 21.4% strikeout rate, actually well above average in terms of limiting the strikeouts against lefties. But in the split, a 124 collective ISO, a 2.37% home run rate, and create runs 23% worse than average. Just across the board, a weak offense. So I love the spot here for Chris Sale, assuming we're getting 6 out of him. He's getting some ownership on him, of course, because he's Chris Sale in this spot. He's our top, I was clicking on the wrong one. He's our third-ranked DK pitcher, and he's going off at around double the ownership that he is to his probability of being one of your top 2 starters, because he's so good in such a good spot. And he's probably underpriced at 9,700. As big a price tag as that is, he's a 10K pitcher in most spots, and against this Texas team, for sure. So I think the ownership is justified. If you're getting there, it's difficult to get to him, pay for 2 good stacks, and then get to a pitcher that we really trust, who's also going to be positively leveraged. So it creates an interesting roster construction problem around his leverage issue. But I like him better than I like Robbie Ray. I'm a little bit not concerned about Robbie Ray, because I think he probably, all things being equal, cruises through this Detroit lineup. But this is the team that I had in mind, and I've talked shit about the Tigers probably more than anybody all through the season. But if you look at the numbers against lefties, this team creates runs 14% better than average this season against lefties now, the active roster. That is 4th in baseball behind only the Astros, the Yankees, and the Blue Jays against left-handed pitching. If you want to throw a team at Robbie Ray, they strike out 25.2% of the time. He could easily rack up some strikeouts, but this is a guy who has had a major walk problem throughout his career. His average over the last 4 seasons before coming into this year was over 13% walks. This season, he's cut it down to 6 and change, but it's inflated over the past couple of weeks. So I think he's kind of maybe shaky on his form, losing his form. Tigers can often be a get-right spot for pitchers, but with that run creation, nobody on them, cheap guys up and down that lineup that, again, I've talked shit about them all year. I don't like this lineup very much at all, but I think this is maybe one of those spots where we can consider using the Tigers because everybody's under 1% owned. I will have some Robbie Ray. I'll probably be under the field on both sites with Robbie Ray, and I'll probably be over the field on Tiger stacks.
Yeah, and then one other thing to note about Robbie Ray here, at least on FanDuel, amongst the expensive pitchers, he is the most popular today. We have Robbie Ray projected for 11.6% ownership, and he is more popular than Walker Buehler. He's more expensive, more popular than Chris Sale. Those are the 3 guys who are kind of in a price tier of their own. And of the 3 on FanDuel, Robbie Ray is the most popular, and to me at least, he's the worst pitcher of those 3. Over on DraftKings, a little cheaper at 9,900, and he's coming in slightly less ownership than Chris Sale, a lot more ownership than Walker Buehler, though. And I'm on the same page as you. I prefer Chris Sale to Robbie Ray. And another thing I'll add about Chris Sale, his first start back last time out, it was against the Baltimore Orioles, favorable matchup. He threw 89 pitches. And, I think we had to have a little bit of concern about how much he was going to be stretched out, how deep was he going to go into the game. 89 pitches last game. I just assume he's full go now. There's going to be no kind of real restrictions here. If you listen to any of the interviews with him, he seems to be pitching pretty angry and frustrated right now. Have you picked up on that?
I honestly haven't heard enough of his clips, but that wouldn't surprise me at all, especially after having to be on the shelf for 2 years and everything.
Yeah. Also, the guy who potentially may have wanted to get traded from the White Sox, he didn't like their alternate jerseys and cut them with scissors in the locker room and had to get suspended by the team. But yeah, Chris Sale had said that he felt like he wasted 2 years of his career based on things that were out of his control. And he said he's never going to let something like that happen again. And he's going to make the most out of the rest of his career. So I don't really put too much stock into those kind of things. Other than that, I feel like Chris Sale is as prepared to pitch as he could possibly be. And, it's hard to get tune-up starts in baseball, but his first start was against the Orioles, his second start was against the Rangers. So this is about as good of a chance to dip his toes back into the water as possible. So in terms of paying up for options, I feel the best about Chris Sale in cash games amongst the pay up guys. If I'm going cheap, though, I think Sonny Gray is just by far the overall top ideal cash pitcher today. Over on FanDuel, he's the guy I go to in cash games. In DraftKings, My preferred combination is Chris Sale with Sonny Gray. Chris Sale, I like the little bit of salary savings he offers off of Robbie Ray. I also just think he's better. And then Sonny Gray just being at a price point where he's at against the Miami Marlins. He's my overall favorite play on the slate. I know you alluded to it before about how popular he is, but a two-part question here. Number one, would he be your preferred choice in cash games? And then number two, do you want to be overweight to the field to Sonny Gray in tournaments?
Cash games, absolutely. I think number one with a bullet, just based on price alone and, point per dollar upside. He projects fourth among the guys that we've spoken about: Walker Buehler, Chris Sale, Robbie Ray for me in my model. I believe that's where he stands on the site as well, but you're getting a $2,000 discount for him compared to Sale and Ray on FanDuel, $1,000 and change off of Sale and Ray on DK, and more than that off of Walker Buehler, which is why he's also pulling 30% ownership across both sites. So for tournaments, I'll be under the field on Sonny Gray on FanDuel. Just because I don't like getting above 30% on really any pitchers, especially on a slate this big with this many options. I mean, there are 6 legitimate aces on this slate and then a handful of pitchers that I think at least have a reasonable shot at giving you an upside start. So yeah, I'm not going to be above or with the field on Sonny here, but it's a spectacular spot going up against this Marlins lineup. He's a good pitcher. He's had his issues back and forth over the years, but this is a good year that we're getting him on. The Marlins active roster this season too against righties: 131 ISO, 84 WRC plus, so 16% worse than average, 2.73% home run rate, 24.5% strikeout rate. So this is a great spot for Sonny to throw Sonny Gray at. Cash game, absolutely lock him in and just use your money wisely on what you're stacking him with.
All right. Now, I don't want to get too far ahead of talking about hitters here. So we did get a super chat from Carlos Manzo, who's saying that he's way too high on Velasquez. Talk him out of it. That is the Yankees young shortstop who Andrew Velasquez, who is the flat min price over on DK. And he's picking up a decent amount of ownership at 10%. I'm not super high on Velasquez overall. He's had 2 good games in a row, and I think he only had 1 hit in his entire big league career, 2 hits prior to these last 2 games. But what do you make of Andrew Velasquez? To me, I just think he's a little bit too popular and somebody I don't think is particularly good going forward.
On behalf of overexcited Yankees fans around the world, how dare you? And he's the darling of the Bronx these days. He's a quad A player. I mean, he's a guy with a lot of speed. He's one of these, guys who can put the ball in play. And if he gets on base, he might do damage with his legs. He's got 28 stolen bases on the year across AAA and Major League Baseball. So 2 of those came in the last 2 games in the majors. 26 of them had come in the rest of his season. It was 200 or maybe 300 plate appearances that he had in AAA. So those 28 stolen bases, had they all come in the majors, that would be 3rd in the league in fewer plate appearances than Starling Marte and Whit Merrifield, who lead the league with 35 apiece. That said, quad A type player. If you need the savings, he's drawing around 11% ownership on DK, half that on FanDuel, where I like him a little bit better if you want to sneak in a Yankees one-off for 2,100 super cheap, which is something that I did in one of my placeholder lineups. It was either him or Tommy La Stella, and I'm really torn on that one because they're the same price. La Stella is hitting 2nd for his lineup, probably a better overall player, major league hitter, similar kind of a spot. There's just so much upside that I'm kind of maybe playing the upside of Andrew Velasquez gets on, steals a base, and then gets driven in once or twice throughout the game. So I'm torn on that spot. I don't dislike Velasquez as a cheap player if you need him, though.
Yeah, I mean, based on the price point, if you're throwing him in, fine. But if you're playing multiple lines, I would be underweight to the field on him at 10%. And based on the way that Carlos phrased his question, where he said, I'm way too high on Andrew Velasquez, that makes me think he's in a pretty big portion of his lineups. And look, even with some of the recent success, he's a 75 WRC plus in the big leagues this year overall for his career. And by the way, he's not some young prospect. He's 27 years old. He's had chances in the major leagues before. For his overall career, he has a 43 WRC plus. Zips projects him with a 72 WRC plus the rest of the year. It's all well and good that he has speed and can steal bases. Doesn't matter if he never gets on base, which seems like is going to be an issue for him going forward. But those are absolutely my thoughts on
and for people who aren't familiar with it, sorry, just to clean that up real quick, for people who aren't familiar with the term quad A player out there, and I know you are, but people probably didn't catch it. That means, exactly what you're saying. He's a kid who's advanced past the point where he would normally have been called up if he was a prospect. He was a non-prospect to begin with. He's a career minor league type guy. He's had some nice seasons in the minors where he has had decent WRC pluses. He's hit a handful of home runs. His best season was probably 2018 for Tampa Bay, 461 plate appearances, 12 homers, 29 stolen bases in AAA. So, I mean, that's the kind of guy we're talking about. He's a minor league player. So, do not get overexcited and over roster Andrew Velasquez person who asked the question. Totally agree.
Yeah. It would be one thing if he's like 1 or 2% owned, but he's going to be one of the most popular shortstops due to his price point today. So that is a little bit problematic for me now. The next guy that I think we need to bring up here, because he's somebody who's picking up some ownership and people are asking about him in the YouTube chat, is Blake Snell, who I don't know how this guy is picking up 25% ownership right now on DK. Over on FanDuel, we've got Blake Snell projected for 8% ownership. That still seems a little high to me, although he's 9K on FanDuel as well. But I mean, this guy has been so miserable over the course of the year. He's been one of the best pitchers in baseball for years. And even though he's moved to the National League this year, it's gone so far south for him. He's still young. He still has good stuff. 28 years old, 95.2 average mile per hour fastball velocity. But his numbers this year, 4.8 ERA, 5.5 not expected ERA. The strikeout stuff is still there, but he's walking so many hitters that it's difficult for him to stay deep into games. So Blake Snell, just because people are asking about him in the YouTube chat, and he's also picked up some ownership. What are you doing with him today? Because I did see, sorry, one more thing before I throw it back to you. Somebody did say that they like Blake Snell as a pivot to Sonny Gray, but it's not like Blake Snell is picking up that much less ownership. They're about comparably owned. So Blake Snell, what do you make of him as a tournament option?
Yeah, I would consider that 25% ownership on him and 30% on Sonny Gray or around there, just basically about the same. And you're only picking up 400 in savings to do it for a guy that I trust to, less probably to get deeper in his game. Arguably in a worse spot. Yeah, definitely in a worse spot here actually against the Phillies. So you're dealing with a guy who's probably going to pitch a short game. I know he's had a few extended starts in his last few outings, but it's still a major question mark. And then to me, just the walk rate alone is reason not to play this guy. The 1.56 whip alone is reason not to go to him against an offense that, while they're overrated, we've talked about it a number of times against both hands this season, they're still not the worst offense in the league. It's not like you're throwing them up against the dregs of the league here. So yeah, for me, I'll leave him in Cruncher. He's not projecting as one of my top guys. And the Phillies, to just clean up what I just said about them, above average against lefties, 4% above average with a 174 ISO, 3.86% home run rate in the split. So there's reason to believe in the Phillies offense here. If I get a few shares of them, I'll be fine with it, but it wouldn't be more than the field 7.4 on FanDuel. And I think I would definitely target an undercut at 25% on DK.
Yeah, it's he's one of the most popular pitchers on the slate. So if people think they're getting to him to be lower owned, it's just he's not low owned. That's not the case. I know we've got Sean V in the YouTube chat is bringing up that we have seen pretty significant home road splits for Blake Snell this year, which is true. He has a 2.4 ERA at home, which is significantly better, obviously, than 7.01 on the road. And even his underlying numbers are better at home than the road. But there's still the issue of the ownership and just what is a fair number for Blake Snell to be owned. And to me, it's less than 25% on a slate this size, in my personal opinion. I think there's also a lot of recency bias here where people just say the Phillies have a bad offense because they haven't been good over the last couple of weeks, but it's not like this is a bad offense on the whole. So to me, I think Blake Snell is a little bit too popular, and there's still the issue of just, I don't know how deep he's going to work into the game. That's been an issue for him for a lot of the season. But now let's start to talk about some of these cheaper pitchers, because is there any of them that are making into your lineups at any kind of significant rate?
So I've restarted my crunch like 9 different times as we cover different things or something pops up here. So I'm not there yet. I expect I'll have a fair amount of Lance McCullers going up against that Seattle team. I think that's an interesting enough spot. So he's a pitcher that I don't typically go out of my way for, but I think he's good enough to warrant with an 8,500 price tag on FanDuel at least some consideration. 27.7% strikeout rate for the season. He also walks too many at 11.2% walks over his 114 innings this year. 1.26 whip though, so you can see the whip is significantly lower than we were just talking about with Snell, despite a very similar walk rate. He's also relatively safe even when he gives up the free pass. 5.1% barrel ball rate, only a 7-degree average launch angle, so he's very difficult to elevate the ball against. A little bit more like line drive, ground ball trajectory. 39.4% hard hit, 89.8 mile an hour average exit velo. We don't sweat that as much with that kind of a launch angle, that kind of a trajectory. And you're throwing him up against the Mariners lineup that is good, but I mean, they're not the most fearsome lineup in one of these slates. And when we're talking about some savings on a pitcher, I think it makes sense to go to him. 25.2% strikeout rate against right-handed pitching this season, 92 WRC plus, so that's 8% below average run creation, 159 team ISO is below average. They do hit home runs, 3.78% home run rate, a little bit above average in the split. But I think McCullers is both safe and has upside. So for the FanDuel discount, I like it. On DK at 9,500, where he's kind of mixed right in with those other guys, he would be at the bottom of that list for me.
Yeah, it's It's just so hard. I'm just kind of scrolling the list to try to find somebody who I like for cheap. And one thing I'm gravitating towards a little bit, you mentioned his name before, is Miles Mikolas, just because if you look at his recent minor league starts, and he's only made one start the entire season. So that's one thing I kind of looked at, and I just kind of wrote him off as being like, oh, okay, that means he's going to have some kind of pitch count restrictions. But if you look at his last minor league start, he pitched 7 innings, had 8 strikeouts and no walks. I don't think there's going to be any kind of real significant pitch count restriction on Mikolas, just based on that he went 7 innings in his last start. So he seems to be stretched out. He has a really favorable matchup. So if I had to roster one guy who's priced under 8K on DK as an SP2 and get to him over, like 10% or something like that, Mikolas would be my option. And I don't even know if there's anybody else I'd really be able to consider.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. For me, it's a little bit scary because we're talking about attacking a Pirates team. That's not scary at all. But we are talking about using a guy who, in his basically 2 good major league seasons, he had a 18.1% strikeout rate and an 18.8% strikeout rate. So it's not a huge upside spot in terms of his ability to sit hitters down. That was over 2018, 2019, 200 innings and 184 innings. He did have a 3.67 xFIP the first one of those years, a 4.18 the second year, 2.83 ERA that first season with a 3.37 xERA. That was his best year. This is also a guy who's 32, so he's not a necessarily major league caliber player. He had a very late breakthrough, has pitched in the minors, like you said. So based on the pitch count in that last start, I do like it. Based on the opponent, the Pirates rather have been just flat bad against pretty much everybody this season. 1.37 team ISO, 18% worse creating runs, 2.76 home run rate against against right-handed pitching in the split, 23.6% strikeout rate. So that was the one thing they had been good at, was limiting the strikeouts. And even that's gotten worse through the year. They're just in the middle of the league now. So it's an upside spot for Mikolas. If we get 6, 7 innings out of him, get the bid for the quality start, the bid for the win with the good Cardinals going up against Mitch Keller here, I think it's a good spot for 7,000 on FanDuel and for 6,900 on DK. And he's not drawing much ownership, like you said. So yeah, I think it's an anti-field kind of a play, and it makes some sense to get, it's not difficult to get well over the field on him. I'll put it that way.
All right. And now on the flip side, here's the negative. If you go over to our top props tool, that is free to use over on Awesemo.com. The top bet of the day is Miles Mikolas under 4.5 strikeouts. That is 56% expected ROI. So I do think that we're projecting him a little bit too low for me personally. I think that that he has more ability to stretch than I think that our projections might give him credit for, just based on that, like I said, that last minor league start where he got a full workload. So to me, I'm a little bit higher on Mikolas than everybody else. He's only projected for 3% ownership, and relative to the difficulty of finding cheap pitchers today, especially on DK where we need a roster too, I'm comfortable getting well over the projected ownership on him. Any other pitchers that you think are worth bringing up here?
Let me jump back over to that tab. I mean, I think we could see a reasonably good start out of Max Fried against the Orioles. I think he's somewhat interesting, but he's in the same price range as some of these other guys that we've talked through that I like better. I'm worried about Luke Giolito for the price against the Tampa Bay Rays. They're good offense, and that's a concerning spot. He's not been as good as he was earlier in the season. So I don't know how much Giolito I'll have, but he'll definitely be in my player pool. I'll pull whatever shares of him I get. I'll be okay with, because there are strikeouts in that lineup as well. I mentioned Kikuchi's crossing off for me, despite he's, for whatever reason, projecting out okay for his price tag, but I just don't trust it against that Astros lineup. They're good at everything against both hands, and I just hate throwing pitchers at them. Alex Wood is maybe a little bit interesting for the price going up against Oakland. Oakland's got a ton of power, but it's not as much against lefties. Let me pull that up and make sure that I'm not lying about that as I'm saying it. But I think he's just been good enough through the season that you can reasonably expect to start him here. Oakland a little better than I thought against lefties for power, though. 109 WRC plus for creating runs, 4.18% strike home run rate, and a 173 ISO. So maybe I'll pull that back a little bit. But I think he's capable of getting through that lineup, maybe finding a few strikeouts in it. So he'd probably be the bottom of my list. There's nobody really. You could maybe talk me into a share or two of James Caprillion if you needed him on the DK slate on the other side of that game. The last guy I think is worth at least talking about maybe is Carlos Carrasco, just because I don't know what to expect from him. I don't think I'm going to get to him, and I think I am going to get to Dodgers bats. Do you see that differently, or are you going to Carrasco at all against the Dodgers here?
No, I kind of was encouraged by Carrasco's first start. He made, I think it was against the Reds, if I remember correctly.
Mhm.
But it's low. It's been tough sledding for him recently,
Yeah.
and you just kind of start to wonder with Carrasco. All the injuries he's had. He hasn't pitched all that much this year. Also, just a brutal matchup he has today. But the results from his last few starts have just not been good at all. Last start against the Dodgers, 2 innings, gave up 6 runs, 3 homers. Start before that, pitched against the Nationals, made it through 1 inning, gave up 4 runs and a homer. Start before that was against the Marlins, a fairly easy matchup. He was chalk on that slate. He only managed to make it through 4 1/3 innings and gave up a couple of runs. So I'm pretty low on Carrasco right now. If I see some signs that he's going to start to turn it around, I'd feel a little bit better. The other thing also that's kind of concerning here is we've seen a dip in his velocity the last couple of starts. So there's some red flags with me with Carrasco. I prefer to stay away from him, even with all the slim pickings we have today.
Yeah, and look, it's definitely heroic that he's made it back and everything, and multiple times now with the injury and everything. And he was a high-end pitcher in terms of strikeouts. A lot of seasons in the 28, 29% range, in the mid-20s. But he also had some clunky season in terms of his xFIP and in terms of the amount of base runners he added. So he was always a tiered down kind of guy to me anyway, a guy I didn't fully trust for DFS purposes, a guy who could definitely get lit up on the wrong slate when he made a few mistakes. So yeah, just based on all the major question marks here and the quality of that Dodgers lineup, it's not a spot for me. And I am going to Dodgers bats on the other side of it.
All right, so we could jump over to talk about some of the offense. But first, guys, not only do we have baseball shows on the channel, but we have football shows coming up, not just in the future for the regular season, but NFL preseason shows as well. So subscribe to the channel, like this video. NFL preseason live before lock is coming up next. And if you guys are looking to play NFL DFS this year, you could sign up for our NFL annual pass right now. Get the early bird special using the promo code BLITZ. That'll get you 25% off your yearly membership. So if you're going to sign up, you might as well do it now. Take advantage of that 25% discount. That is promo code BLITZ for 25% off the Awesemo Plus NFL annual package. All right, so let's jump over to these offenses now. And this is a slate where we talked about it a little bit at the top, but because of everybody paying up for pitching, we have certain offenses that are expensive that look like they're in good spots. They're just picking up no ownership. So the main one being that stands out is the Atlanta Braves. So the Braves on DK today. 12% chance to be the top stack, the highest of any team on the slate, but only a 4.1% ownership share. The reason being is because there's a lot of expensive pricing there that kind of makes them difficult to get to. Over on FanDuel, the Braves a little more appropriately owned, but still going under-owned, 10.7% chance being a top stack, 9% ownership share. So what are you doing with the Braves as a fairly expensive team that appears to be under-owned, but it's kind of hard to get to with the pitchers we want to roster?
Yeah, we'll see how that starts coming up for me. And if they're not coming up enough in crunches, I'm going to start mashing the little thumbs up there and getting the more of them, because I want to be over the field's mark for sure on that spot. They look fantastic to me. I understand it because they're super expensive, but I would expect that the field's just going to be trying to figure out ways to pay for these guys in this matchup. In Baltimore, going up against Keegan Aiken, 19.6% strikeout rate for Aiken, 8.7% walk rate, so he puts too many guys on, 9.6% barrels, allows too many barrels, 44.2% hard hit rate, massive hard hit rate against just a bad pitcher. 1.82 whip is one of the ugliest marks in baseball. They're going to be Braves on base. They're going to be Braves hitting home runs. Cue the no-hitter for Keegan Aiken, of course, as I'm saying that, but I really like the spot here for the Braves. And yeah, they're way, way under-owned. Jorge Soler drawing a lot of ownership on the FanDuel slate for the discount that you get on his salary, hitting second. And they're generally more affordable, I think, on the FanDuel slate. So you're seeing a little bit more inflated ownership, but we're still talking about the highest owned guy, 17%. Austin Riley coming in at 12, and then everybody else in single digits. So I'm going to figure out ways to put the Braves together with other cheap teams. The Tigers come to mind because I mentioned them being cheap, under-owned in an interesting spot. So I'll have some of that. I'll have some of them with a lot of the other cheap teams, not necessarily even going dumpster diving, because there are a few more affordable spots on the FanDuel slate in terms of pitching as well. So I expect a lot of my like Lance McCullers shells will probably be tied to the Braves. If I get to Alex Wood or some of these other guys we talk about, I expect those will be tied to the Braves as well.
So here's what I want to talk about next. And also the Braves, to me, I love the spot for them. The ownership is right. I'm just not sure as I'm building my lineups now, how I'm going to be overweight them. I'm just not sure how overweight, just based on some of the pricing, particularly on DK. But I'd like to be like 5-6x the field. I just don't know if that's going to be totally doable. I do think a lot of my Brave stacks are probably going to have Miles Michaelis in them just based on the pricing there. So that's kind of my feeling is any Braves I get to, I'm trying to find a way to, so it's not like, hey, I have Michaelis and like 80% of my Braves stacks, but that just might be a forced issue based on the pricing algorithm.
That's one that I would love if this game was starting an hour later, 2 hours later, something like that, where we could set the slate, get the entries in, and then go back to it, sit there and actually, manipulate the lineups in real time, 150 lineups, and really set the lineups exactly the way I want them, rather than taking them out of the crunch, putting them through the filter, and kind of taking what I get with some of the constructions. They'll be well constructed, but yeah, that's this kind of thing where I'd like to go in, examine each lineup, who they're paired with, could I upgrade the pitcher, and spots like that. So yeah, I'm with you on that.
All right, and we have to talk about this Coors Field game because the chat, I'm not going to say lighting up about it, but we've got the chat talking about Tyler Gilbert a little bit. Tyler Gilbert, his first major league start, a no-hitter against the Padres, and really came out of nowhere for a couple of reasons. Number one, it appeared he was going to be on a pitch count that game because he was throwing like 2 innings per appearance prior to that one. Then he was just pitching no-hitter. They just left him out there. He gave up a ton of hard contact. The ball just kept getting hit at guys. It wasn't like he was generating swing and misses or anything like that. But if you look at his minor league numbers in AAA this year, he had a 5.4 xFIP. So it's not like this was a guy who was any good in the minor leagues. He's 27 years old. He has an average fastball velocity of under 90 miles per hour. And that was with a lot of his appearance coming out of the bullpen. So to me, with Tyler Gilbert, I think this guy is not particularly good at all. I know we've got some of the YouTube chat maybe considering rostering him here. Not something I would recommend doing. But on the other side, what are you going to do with the Colorado Rockies, who, once again, on FanDuel, a little bit under-owned because of the pricing? On DK, though, a little bit different story with the Rockies, who are one of the more popular stacks on the slate at 11.4% owned. So what do you make of the Rockies and Tyler Gilbert?
Yeah, I think it's a team that we can get to some degree. I don't love going to the Rockies, even in Coors Field. I don't love going to Coors. I think they're probably going to be a little bit more popular than we've got them projected for. And some of the best hitters in that lineup are projected for fairly heavy ownership. I do like the fact that Charlie Blackmon, CJ Cronin, Ryan McMahon are going off in single-digit ownership. So I actually put those guys in assigning my one-offs. Those are my available one-offs from this Colorado lineup. And then I'm leaving out guys like Brendan Rodgers, Trevor Story, who I like very much as players, but they're both pulling around 20% ownership. So I can just kind of skip that in the one-off spots. I'll take them in stacks where I can offset some of the ownership by putting them together with some of their lower-owned teammates. But I think those three are the more interesting hitters, just given the lack of overall ownership. Totally agree with you on Tyler Gilbert. The kid's 27 years old. I'd like to invite anybody who's thinking about rostering him as a pitcher to remember, A, that this is in Coors Field, and B, this is a 27-year-old kid. Think about the Diamondbacks pitching staff the last few years. If this kid was any good whatsoever, he would have been up before this. He would have been featured before this. We would have known his name before this year, before this no-hitter. He's not a good pitcher. Low 20 strikeout rate kid all the way through the minor league system. There's nothing to talk about here. It was a very nice story. He'll go down in baseball history on an obscure trivia list with all those other guys from the 1880s whose names we saw. Learned an interesting fact about one of those guys was let me try and put this the right way because I don't want to use the word. They think that unbeknownst to many people who would have a problem with it at the time, he was actually African-American. Let's put it that way. So like 50 years before Jackie Robinson broke the color barrier, they think that one of those guys who threw a no-hitter in his first start in the majors was actually an under the radar African-American player, which I thought was fascinating. Very, very interesting.
Is there a book on that or anything? It's kind of interesting.
I assume there's at least some articles, and the guy's name is escaping me. I don't want to look at my phone while we're talking, but I do have it. I'll DM you with it after the show. There was at least an article about it.
By the way, also one other thing about Tyler Gilbert, his xFIP in his last start out 4.64. That is, it's kind of funny because if you look at the advanced metrics for his last start, it wouldn't even rate out as being a good start overall. He just happened to not give up hits, but 5 strikeouts to 3 walks. Those are frankly not good numbers. He gave up a lot of contact. The ball was hit at guys. So it is what it is. He also only induced a 25% ground ball rate. That is one of the most unlikely outings that we'll probably ever see from a pitcher. So Tyler Gilbert, I know that you don't really want to say this, but you can make a case that he pitched no-hitter and didn't even pitch particularly well in that start. So it's a Coors Field game. I don't have interest in Tyler Gilbert, but the Rockies are not a team that I'm dying to stack either. But the other side of the game, the Arizona Diamondbacks, who are also picking up a little bit of ownership against Austin Gomber. I kind of like Gomber as a pitcher. I think he's solid. I'm not really looking to play him a ton today or anything like that, but I think he's good enough to the point that I'm not dying to roster a fairly crappy Diamondbacks lineup either.
Yeah, I got a lot of use out of Gomber earlier in the season in my Dynasty League. Picked him up a few starts, mostly on the road in DFS, and got a little bit of use out of him. I don't fully trust him yet at Coors Field, but he's on the list of at least guys that, I'll consider at Coors. The price tag, 6,800, totally fine, but I like him more to potentially suppress this very bad Diamondbacks lineup than I'm considering going to him on such a deep slate and with so many good options for starting pitchers. There's just no need to roster a Coors Field pitcher to me. But yeah, he's going up against an Arizona team. There's no need to roster this team other than the park factors. 2.09% strikeout rate, home run rate. That's the number against righties. Let me sort that correctly. 2.83% home run rate against lefties. 171 ISO. All right, that's a little bit above average. They create runs a little bit above average, but it's just a bad team. I don't want to go to this team, and I respect Gomber a little bit more than this. 8.4% barrel ball rate, 34% hard hit. That plays fairly well, 23.9% strikeout rate. Like I said, I like him to shut down this team more than I like them to create any runs against him here. So for me, Diamondbacks largely off the board.
Yeah, and that's kind of how I feel too. The other thing, they're also going a little bit over-owned on DK. FanDuel, you can make a case they're going under-owned, but DK, they're picking up a fairly significant amount of ownership. And Austin Gomber is the type of pitcher who, number one, he induces a lot of ground balls, which is a good way to find success at Coors Field. If you're somebody's giving up a lot of contact and a lot of fly balls, that could lead to disaster. But the fact that he's generating a lot of ground balls this year, that's helped him stay successful at Coors Field. And the Diamondbacks offense just stinks. So it's a situation where I don't think Gomber at Coors Field is going to generate enough strikeouts to be all that likely to be viable today. But I'm hoping he is able to reduce the damage enough against the Diamondbacks to where neither side is really all that relevant. So Coors Field to me today, it's I hate it because it's Coors Field and there's always upside there, but it's two absolutely miserable offenses. Diamondbacks, Rockies, two of the worst offense in baseball. Now, arguably the best offense in baseball and also the team picking up the most ownership today is your New York Yankees. And you're not wearing the Yankees hat today like you normally are. It doesn't look like it anyway. Your head's up a little bit, so I can't tell if there's the Yankees logo on there. But Yankees, for a slate of this size, they're picking up a ton of ownership, nearly 20% on both FanDuel and DraftKings. Here's the approach I've had with the Yankees basically all year. When they're low owned, I'm rostering them. When they're high owned, I'm staying away from them. If they go out and have their game where they hit, 6 homers and score 12 runs, it will be something that absolutely crushes me today. But based on the current ownership, I don't have that much interest in the Yankees. But what say you?
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I'll take some shares of them, but I cut them low in terms of how much of the portions of stacks they're allowed to be in Fantasy Cruncher. And then my sorting process is going to cut them even lower than that. So it's definitely a day where I'll thin slice the Yankees well below their public ownership. That's pretty much up and down the lineup. The only guys owned in the single digits are going to be Andrew Velazquez, who we already talked about, Brett Gardner, who has struggled ridiculously and is hitting 9th instead of 2nd today, thankfully. So yeah, this lineup has a ton of power. They all project very well for home runs, particularly from 2 through 7 in that lineup. Everybody well over the average chance of a home run in my home run model, but they're pulling similar marks in their ownership. So, I mean, they're just hard to leverage. They're hard to get unique with in any way, shape, or form. They're going to be rostered with similar pitchers, similar second stacks by the field. So it's just a team you're going to be walking hand in hand with so much of the field on. I'll take some of them. I hope to get them where I'm getting some of the under-owned pitchers, under-owned second stacks, but they're very difficult to roster. I'm totally with you on that one.
Any individual hitters, though, that you do think could make sense? Brett Gardner, at least he's cheap. He's only projected for 4% ownership on DK. Everybody else, though, is projected for double-digit ownership. Even Andrew Velazquez, we talked about a little bit earlier, people are still buzzing about a little bit in the YouTube chat. He's going to be one of the most popular shortstops on the slate today. One thing that I've mentioned a lot during the year is with some of these popular stacks in good spots, there are ways to reduce the ownership share by going to guys at the end of the order. I just don't really see a viable way to do that with the Yankees today, though.
Yeah, no, to me, honestly, if I'm going to Velazquez in the 8 hole at 11 and change the ownership, yeah, he's the min price. I'd rather just swallow a few extra points of ownership and take DJ LeMahieu up top at second base. If you're considering Velazquez as a second baseman, you're paying way more. He's more than double the price of Velazquez, but he's a way, way better hitter, and they're going to be owned similarly. So I know LeMahieu has not been nearly what he was the last 2 years, 270, 351, 365 with a .096 ISO this season, only creating runs 2% better than average, 7 home runs on the year. I think they said the other day, nobody's had more plate appearances between home runs in the league currently than DJ LeMahieu. Hey, maybe he's due. So he's one of the lower owned Yankees. If you want to get to him, he's one of the few Yankees who I'm allowing to be a one-off just because FanDuel 12% ownership, 3,400. I think that's a mistake price and probably not enough ownership given what's going to the rest of the Yankees behind him. So if I can pick off a few runs scored or something like that with DJ in a one-off spot, I'll take it. none of the power bats are reasonable in terms of where they're going to be owned by the field. If you want to get to them, you're rostering the probability of a home run, and then you're just going to be alongside the field. So hope to be different in other spots that outscore the common spots, but it's just difficult. It's a difficult trick to pull. DK, maybe Gary's interesting at 10.8 ownership, 10.8% ownership, but you're paying 4,800 for him. I like the home run upside, but again, difficult to pay for, difficult to roster.
Yeah, so it just kind of struck me. We've talked about we like the Braves so far, and then every other offense we've come up has had some ownership, and we've just kind of poo-pooed on them. So I feel like I have to ask you now. Let's give the people and tell them what they actually should play as opposed to who they shouldn't play. So what is your most rostered stack right now? Or if it's the Braves, what is the team you like the second most on the slate?
Yeah, so we're definitely coming up with a lot of Braves. We are coming up with a good amount of the Boston Red Sox, which is, I think, a fairly interesting spot for the Red Sox. Let me flip back over to that. Going up against Dane Dunning and the Texas lineup at home in Fenway, Hitters Park. It's a favorable situation. I think Dunning's a good pitcher. The guys on the last show were talking about it a little bit as well. On the season, 3.69 xFIP, 22.9% strikeout rate, around the league average strikeout rate, 7.3% barrel balls allowed, 42.6% hard hit is too much, 1.38 whip, allows too many walks at 8.3%, and a few too many hits. So there's probably going to be Red Sox on base. Dunning is more a pitcher that I think is going to be better in the future, but he's not going to ever really be one of these superstar standout kind of a pitchers. He's a third starter type, a guy who can keep the ball in the park, keep the ball on the ground, 6.2 degree average launch angle on the season. So maybe he takes the top off of the Red Sox. In terms of the top end teams on the night, all of the Red Sox are below 10 in my home run model, despite their extreme power upside. So that kind of shows where he limits that a little bit. But that said, I think that they can certainly get to him. I think they can certainly elevate that 6.2 degree average launch angle to home run trajectory. You're talking about Rafael Devers, Xander Bogaerts, Kyle Schwarber, JD Martinez, some of the better home run hitters in the league. So I don't mind getting the stacks around those guys. You can throw in Alex Verdugo, Enrique Hernandez, Bobby Dahlbeck from the bottom of the lineup. Jaron Duran is in play. There's a lot to like about the under-owned Red Sox here, I think.
Yeah, and I think the other thing too with Boston is just looking through the prices, especially on DK, they're much cheaper than we would normally expect them to be. You know, it feels like forever ago that happened. Remember when Kyle Schwarber just homered every day and he was injured for a little while, got traded to Boston. We haven't seen him play a whole lot recently. He's played 3 games since coming off the injured list. Kyle Schwarber, I still think, is a very good hitter and should have a lot of success in Fenway. So to me, he's a little bit too cheap. And obviously the top end guys, JD Martinez, Xander Bogaerts, Rafael Devers, they're expensive. Everybody else in the lineup, and Kike Hernandez is a little bit of a price tag to him as well. But everybody else in the lineup is cheap and unowned. And a lot of them, I think, are good hitters. You mentioned Duran. I like him. Schwarber, Verdugo, Dahlbeck, Christian Vasquez. Really, any of those guys are cheap. You could roster them, pay up for pitching pretty comfortably with Boston stacks, or maybe mix and match them with some of the more expensive guys. I think I want to be overweight to every single hitter in the Boston lineup tonight.
Yeah, I think that's a great play. I really do. I think it makes a ton of sense. We talked up most of the reasons there. And yeah, like I said, they don't project great for me in terms of the home run model, but the run creation upside is there. They're playing in their home park, which is the Hitters Park. And it's just another one of those spots we talk about a lot where get to the best offenses in baseball when they're under-owned. And this is one of those situations, and Dunning's not a pitcher who would scare us away. Another team that's similar to me in that spot is the Cincinnati Reds. It looks like they're getting a little under-owned to me in their home run park. In their home run park, that's actually kind of accurate. Their home park, which is something of a home run park, definitely a hitter's park. Eliza Hernandez, decent pitcher on the other side, similar to what we said about Dunning. I think he's okay, a little bit better in the strikeout department, 26.5%, but that's only over 12 2/3. He's been a decent pitcher through his career, but he's also got his flaws. And I just get nice home run marks on the Reds. I think they're an offense that we've used a lot to succeed this year. They project well for sequential hitting, for run creation for me, and they're going off in the single digits. So I really like this. It looks like only Moustakas on the FanDuel slate because he's wildly mispriced at 2,500. He's going at 15% ownership over there. Everybody else in the single digits. On DK, you're getting Moose in the single digits, and you're getting Tyler Naquin up at the 15% mark because he's mispriced at 2,300 hitting second in that lineup. So I like getting to the Reds here.
Yeah, Tyler Naquin on DK is what Mike Moustakas is on FanDuel. It's just two guys who are just oddly priced incorrectly. Like it doesn't really make any sense that Naquin be 2,300 on DK. It doesn't make sense that Moustakas be 2,500 on FanDuel. So Naquin, 15% is a pretty hefty amount of ownership for a slate this size. I actually don't have an issue with it even in tournaments, just because it's a slate where we're so starved to find value. And he's so just egregiously mispriced that I don't mind getting to him a bunch in tournaments and in cash games. It's very rare that I look at a hitter and say you have to play this guy in cash games. You have to play Tyler Naquin, I think, in DK cash games at his price, and the same goes for Mike Moustakas on FanDuel at his price.
Yeah, I think Naquin absolutely over there, and Moustakas is definitely in my player pool in terms of being allowed to be in both stacks and as a one-off, despite usually around 15% there is where I start to get hesitant. All right, do I really want to allow this guy as a one-off and ride it? But second and third base eligibility for only 2,500, there's so much flexibility. He can make lineups unique on his own just for slotting into one or the other spot. And then you get an alternate player from the popular other stack that you're going to in like 4-3 constructions. So I like that even with the popularity as a one-off. Excellent home run mark. I believe I actually made him my home run pick of the day.
Oh, well, there we go. We could let's actually let's do some quick home run picks right now. So do you have another guy you want to make as an official home run pick, or is that your guy?
That was the one that I put in my column, which is always the one that I consider my official pick of the day, but I can definitely run through some others. We'll discount the high-owned Yankees on the top of the board here, and basically all of the Yankees are at the top of the board. Fernando Tatis, significant popularity on both sites, but that said, he's the second player behind Joey Gallo that's over a 20 in my home run model, 10 being the above average chance mark. Then it's Yankees until we get to Vlad Guerrero. Manny Machado, who I think is actually under-owned in that spot for the Padres. And I think the rest of that Padres lineup is actually pretty interesting and pretty under-owned. Then we get to more Yankees. Then we get to Moose Aristides Aquino from the Reds that we just talked about. And then a little bit, I didn't sort it, so he's not properly sorted there. I was going to say a little odd duck there in Wilmer Flores, but he was missorted out of there. So it's a lot of the teams we've talked about. Josh Donaldson from the Twins pops in this one here. So he's one we haven't really talked up. Haven't talked a lot of Twins, but I'm getting a couple of those guys here as well. So they'll probably be into my my lineups here as I look through them.
And per our Awesemo player props tool, the number one bet of the day in terms of a home run prop. But by the way, the other day when I did this, the number one was Freddie Freeman. He ended up homering and hit for the cycle that day. I don't know if we're going to get the cycle out of Yordan Alvarez, but he is plus 425 to homer today. We have him homering 24% of the time. That is the number one ROI home run pick of the day. So I'm going to go with Yordan Alvarez, who I also think I made as a home run pick the other day. But Yordan Alvarez, plus 425 to homer. Where does he rank out in your model?
Counting them up, this also has guys who may or may not be starting. I think most of these guys are in, but he comes in 35th overall, but that's with an 11.53. And then if you look up to like Gary Sanchez, who is 14th, he's got a 14.08. So we're not talking about a huge differential. Love the call on Yordan Alvarez, one of my favorite hitters in the game, and an above average chance to hit home run in my model as well here.
Yeah, plus 425 is pretty long odds for somebody with the kind of power that Yordan Alvarez has. And, typically a little hard to find those kind of numbers on power hitters. But one other guy who is a very strong power hitter that also is pretty long odds, Matt Olson, plus 450, who we have homering 22% of the time. That makes it for another positive ROI bet. So actually longer odds on Matt Olson than Yordan Alvarez has. A little odd to see Matt Olson at plus 450 to homer. So one of the overall home run leaders in baseball. Where does he rate out for you?
That's an interesting one. Yeah, he is one of the absolute go-to for home run upside in most slates. I'm just looking for him. He's above average, slightly behind where Alvarez was. He's at a 10.95, so it puts him above the magic number, puts him a little bit behind Alvarez on my list. And probably going up against a little bit of a better pitcher, 7.9 degree average launch angle, 5.9% barrel ball rate for Alex Wood. Lefty-lefty matchup as well. Doesn't really concern me with Olson. You get a 42.9% hard hit rate and a 90.2 average exit velo out of Wood there. So I like the chances for Olson to hit home run here. Absolutely. That's a good bet.
All right. So we've got like 90 seconds left, and then we're going to turn this show over to the NFL preseason live before lock. But just before we head out, I'm going to ask you, are there any offenses that we have not talked about that you like as stacks that are maybe going a little bit under-owned that the people could build a quick lineup in before the slate locks?
It looks like the Blue Jays are coming up some for me, but they're over-owned on the DK slate, over-owned on the FanDuel slate. The Brewers are coming up for me a little bit as well, and they are positively leveraged on DK, slightly negative on the FanDuel slate. I think maybe they come in a little less than we have them projected, so I'll have some of those teams. Two teams we didn't talk about. I like the Blue Jays way, way better in a total like ownership vacuum than I like that Brewers lineup. But I think there's some upside for the Brewers here, particularly going up against struggling Pat Corbin. A lot of guys who are better lefty-righty in that lineup. So Avi Garcia comes to mind. So I'll take some Brewers where I get them.
All right, one final promo code for you guys before we head this over to the NFL Live Before Lock show. By the way, guys, also like this video, subscribe to the YouTube channel, because we're going to have a lot more football content coming up, obviously, in the coming weeks. But also, we have season-long NFL content, and our Awesemo Fantasy Football Draft Kit is available for season-long and best ball fantasy leagues. If you sign up right now using the promo code wide receiver, but that is WR. So that is wide receiver, the abbreviation WR. That will get you 33% off at your checkout when you're signing up for the draft kit package. Use the promo code WR, is in short for wide receiver. That gets you 33% off. That'll do it for Terry and I, but guys, stick around. Preseason Live for a lot coming up next.